Rule 10. Accordingly, House Rule 10 grants the committee broad jurisdiction to conduct investigations of any matter at any time. This interview was requested by Chairman James Comer as part of the committee's investigation into President Biden's alleged mental and physical decline, the Biden White House's efforts to hide that from the American people, and any unauthorized executive actions. Can the witness please state her name and spell her last name for the record?
My name is Anita Dunn, D-U-N-N.
On behalf of the committee, I want to thank Ms. Dunn for appearing here today. The committee appreciates your appearance for the interview. My name is Peter Spector, and I am a professional staff member for Chairman Comer. Under the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform's rules, you are allowed to have an attorney present to advise you during this interview. Do you have an attorney representing you in a personal capacity with you today?
Yes, I do.
Will counsel please identify themselves for the record?
Yes, my name is Suzanne Grooms. I'm at Cooley.
And I'm Andrew Goldstein, also at Cooley.
Heather Sawyer, Cooley.
Noah Sissoko at Cooley.
For the record, starting with the majority staff, can the additional staff members please introduce themselves with their name, title, and affiliation?
Margaret Harker, Senior Advisor for the majority.
Mitch Benzine, General Counsel with the majority.
Will Harness, Staff Assistant for the majority.
Billy Grant, Counsel for the majority.
Jake Greenberg, Counsel for the committee.
Thank you all. Ms. Dunn, before we begin, I would like to go over the ground rules for this interview. The questioning will proceed in rounds. The majority will ask questions for an hour, then the minority will have an opportunity to ask questions for an hour if they choose. To the extent members have questions for the witnesses, they will be propounded during their side's respective rounds. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
The clock will stop if the witness needs to confer with counsel, when counsel for the witness is speaking, and when members are speaking during the opposite side's round of questions. We will alternate back and forth until there are no more questions. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
There is a court reporter taking down everything I say and everything you say to make a written record of the interview. For the record to be clear, please wait until the staffer questioning you finishes each question before you begin your answer, and the staffer will wait until you finish your response before proceeding to the next question. Further, to ensure the court reporter can properly record this interview, please speak clearly, concisely, and slowly. Also, the court reporter cannot record nonverbal answers such as nodding or shaking your head, so it is important that you answer each question with an audible verbal answer. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Exhibits may be entered into the record. Majority exhibits will be identified numerically. Minority exhibits will be identified alphabetically. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
We want you to answer our questions in the most complete and truthful manner possible, so we will take our time. If you have any questions or do not fully understand the question, please let us know. We will attempt to clarify, add context to, or rephrase our questions. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
If we ask about specific conversations or events in the past and you're unable to recall the exact words or details, you should testify to the substance of those conversations or events to the best of your recollection. If you recall only a part of a conversation or event, you should give us your best recollection of those events or parts of conversations that you do recall. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
You are required by law to answer questions from Congress truthfully. This also applies to questions posed by congressional staff in this interview. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
If at any time you knowingly make false statements, you could be subject to criminal prosecution. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
This includes both knowingly providing false testimony, but also stating that you do not recall or remember something when in fact you do. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Furthermore, you cannot tell half-truths or exclude information necessary to make your statements accurate. You are required to provide all information that would make your response truthful. A deliberate failure to disclose information can constitute a false statement. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Is there any reason you are unable to provide truthful testimony in today's interview?
No, there isn't.
Please note that if you wish to assert a privilege over any statement today, that assertion must comply with the rules of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Pursuant to that, Committee Rule 16C1 states, for the chair to consider assertions of privilege over testimony or statements, witnesses or entities must clearly state the specific privilege being asserted and the reason for the assertion on or before the scheduled date of testimony or appearance. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
I will enter Exhibit 1, a letter transmitted to your counsel dated June 24th, 2025 from Mr. Gary Lakowski, Deputy Counsel to the President. This letter informs you that President Trump has determined not to assert executive privilege over your assessment of former President Biden's fitness for the office of the President and your knowledge of who exercised executive powers during his administration. The letter also states that President Trump will not assert immunity to preclude you from testifying before the House Oversight Committee. Ordinarily, we take a 5-minute break at the end of each hour of questioning, but if you need a longer break or break before that, please let us know and we'll be happy to accommodate.
Thank you.
However, to the extent that there is a pending question, we would ask that you finish answering the question before we take the break. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
I understand you have a written statement that we would like to enter into the record as Exhibit 2, if you have that.
Sure. So, Ms. Dunn is here voluntarily testifying before the committee. She's happy to share information about the topic of the committee's interest, which we understand to be trying to understand who made key decisions and exercised the powers of the executive branch during the previous administration, and understanding her observations of former President Biden's mental acuity and health as one of his closest advisors. She's prepared a statement that explains and answers many of those questions. I'll enter into the record.
Thank you.
And she's happy to read to you if you'd like to hear.
Nothing, thank you. My clock reads 10:10, and the majority's time will begin now.
Hold on, Peter. Ms. Dunn, thank you for being here. Did you provide this opening statement to anyone other than the committee today?
Yes,
Who?
we released it to reporters who've been following these hearings.
Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Dunn, do you believe President Biden was in mental or cognitive decline while he was President of the United States?
I do not believe that.
Do you believe he's still fit to serve today?
I believe
Serve today.
that to serve today, it's August 2025.
Right. President Biden ran for re-election. If he had won, he would be president today. Do you think that he has the cognitive ability to be president today?
I can't speculate on that since the committee has asked me not to speculate. I can say that while I served as a senior advisor to President Biden in the White House and dealt with him on a very regular basis, that he had the cognitive ability to do the job as president.
We'll get a little bit more into your experience after this, but you first worked for President Biden directly for President Biden during his 2020 presidential campaign, is that right?
That's correct.
You also worked during the Obama administration as interim communications director while Joe Biden was vice president and on the 2008-2012 campaigns, is that correct?
That is correct.
Of course, President Biden has literally gotten older, but have you noticed signs of his aging since you first met him?
I first met President Biden when he was a U.S. Senator and I was a Senate staffer, and that was during the 80s. So yes, I have seen him age over those years.
And what are the signs of aging that you've seen in President Biden?
As is the case with with all presidents, he aged in the job. But I would say that primarily while he was president, I thought his voice was softer and that his childhood stutter reappeared.
You thought that his childhood stutter got worse?
I had, yes, I had not even known he had a stutter until I started working on his presidential campaign. But in the course of his presidency, I think the stutter did become more pronounced at times.
So did President Biden, or in his various roles, did he have strategies to limit the appearance of his stutter when he spoke?
He has written himself and talked about the strategies he used when he was a child to overcome his stutter. I am not aware of any strategies he used as president. I'm just not aware of them.
Why do you think his stutter came back, for lack of a better word?
Again, I can't speculate. I can only say what I observed.
You don't think that had anything to do with him being much older or being in cognitive decline?
I don't think a stutter is generally seen as a symptom of cognitive decline, although I'm not a doctor. But I would say that I did think that his voice getting softer and the stutter returning were perhaps signs of his aging in office.
During his presidency, did you receive outreach from people outside of the White House who were concerned about President Biden's cognitive decline?
I don't remember conversations of that kind.
So you don't remember any conversations with somebody from outside of the White House talking to you with concerns that President Biden was in cognitive decline?
I don't remember any conversations of that kind.
During his presidency, did you ever hear concerns about President Biden's cognitive decline from inside of the White House, from White House staff?
No, I do not remember hearing any conversations about cognitive decline within the White House staff.
So just to be clear, nobody, do you think that these conversations were happening and you just weren't part of them? Or do you think that no one inside of the White House was concerned that President Biden was not sharp enough mentally to continue to run for president for a second term or to serve as president?
Well, again, I can't speculate as to what people were talking about. I can only speak to what I observed, which was a president who was engaged with the issues, a president who was making the decisions that a president needs to make, and who had the decisions brought to him for him to make by his senior advisors.
Do you think if people had those concerns about President Biden's cognitive state, that they would have been afraid to bring them to you or other members of the senior staff?
Well, again, I can't speculate. I think I was viewed as a fairly accessible senior staff member.
If somebody had brought a concern like that, how do you think you would have reacted?
You know, because no one brought that kind of concern to me, that's a very hard question for me to answer.
Peter, cognitive decline is a bit of a term of art. Did anyone bring concerns to you about the president's age or his performance in press conferences or anything like that?
You know, his performance as a candidate, clearly as he aged, was something that we recognized. I think I've already said that his voice had grown softer, that he needed to project more, particularly in large crowds, press conferences. And so we did have concerns, I did have concerns, just around his performance as a candidate in those areas. But I thought and continue to believe that the wisdom and experience that he had as president, the record that he had achieved as president, the leadership he provided the country were critically important for the country moving ahead.
I've heard the wisdom and experience line before. I think the president used it himself. Was that your concoction?
No, it was not.
Okay.
I wish it were. I'd have copyrighted it.
Thank you, ma'am.
President Biden obviously ran for re-election in the 2024 campaign. Do you think voters were concerned that President Biden was mentally or cognitively unfit to serve as president?
What we saw in the public polling and what we saw in the private polling was that age was a concern for voters, as it was in 2020. But again, he had served with distinction. He had a record to run on, had the wisdom and experience to do the job, and that's what he was taking to the American people.
I understand what you're saying about age. To me, I think age and mentally or cognitively unfit are two separate issues, right? People age differently, and of course, President Biden, he was the oldest president at that point. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So concerns about age and concerns about his mental or cognitive state are related, but they can be looked at separately. Is that right?
Oh, I think so. And there were voters who had concerns around his age, who did not have concerns around his ability to do the job.
So do you not think that voters were concerned about his ability to do the job in terms of his cognitive abilities?
No, you're asking me to mind read a lot of voters in this country. I can tell you that in our data, we saw that his age was certainly an issue for voters, but that voters also saw him as someone who was doing the job as president.
Some polls after the debate found that 72% of voters did not believe Biden has the mental or cognitive health to serve as president, as well as nearly half of his own party. Do you think that the voters were wrong to be concerned that President Biden was mentally or cognitively unfit to be president?
Coming out of the debate, there's no question that people had concerns that had been brought to the forefront by his poor performance in the debate. Now, we were looking at a campaign where we felt we would have more opportunities to address those concerns through a convention, through a second debate.
You say concerns. Can you define the type of concerns?
The concerns that you just raised in the public polling.
About his cognitive or mental
It's
abilities?
about his ability to be president.
So, just to be clear, do you think voters' concerns about cognitive decline by President Biden were legitimate?
I'm a big believer in listening to voters. So I think we heard those concerns and thought about ways that the president could go address those concerns.
We can rewind a little bit here and we'll get into your roles working directly for President Biden a little bit more later, but I kind of want to talk about some of your other roles. I understand you've had a very long career and try not to harp on each position too long here. But was your first role in government during the Carter administration, is that right?
That's correct.
And you interned for the then White House Communications Director, is that right?
No, I interned for Hamilton Jordan, who was, when I began interning for him, a senior advisor and then became White House Chief of Staff.
Okay, and then did you have another role after being an intern in the Carter administration?
Well, I went to work for Jerry Rafshin, who did the advertising for the 1980 Carter re-election campaign.
So you worked on the campaign after interning at the White House?
That's correct.
And I know you mentioned in our last topic that you had worked in the Senate as well. You said you were a Senate staffer. Was that
That's
a
correct.
government position for a senator, is that right?
Yes.
And again, we'll get into it, but did you have any other government positions besides your internship with the Carter administration and the role you're discussing now in the Senate between then and working for the Biden administration?
Yes, I did. In 1982, I was a press assistant for the Senate Democratic Policy Committee in the United States Senate. I then went to work for Senator John Glenn of Ohio in 1983 and served Senator Glenn through, oh, I'm sorry, don't recall exactly, but probably mid-1984. I then worked for Congressman Chet Atkins, Democrat from Massachusetts, in 1987. And, I worked for Representative Bob Edgar from Pennsylvania from August 1984 through January 1987. I then went to work for Congressman Chet Atkins, Democrat of Massachusetts, through 1987. I next worked in the federal government for United States Senator Bill Bradley. I joined Senator Bradley's staff in, I believe, February of 1991 and served him until August of 1993. In 1995, I was a temporary staffer in the United States Senate for Senator Daschle. And again, in 2001, I served in a full-time temporary basis for Leader Daschle when he became majority leader through the rest of that year, a terrible year. Then I, Then I served in 2009 in the Obama White House and did not serve again in the government until I went to work for President-elect Biden.
And all those dates are to the best of your recollection?
They are to the best of my recollection. I'm a little hazy on a few of them, but I'm pretty good on most.
It was pretty impressive.
We understand and we appreciate that. During those various Senate and House roles, did you also have a role on any of the campaigns, on any political campaigns?
Yes, I did.
Mostly for Senate candidates or for a mix?
When I was working for candidates, it was not when I was by and large, when I was working for the House or the Senate. It was, I also served as the communications director of the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee under John Kerry and then under John Breaux in the 1988 and 1990 cycles. So obviously was working on a huge number of campaigns during that time. I then went to work for, after I left Senator Bradley's staff, I went to work for what was then known as Squire Knapp Oaks, which was a political consulting firm. I worked on a huge number of campaigns during that period. I worked on Senator Bradley's presidential campaign in 1999 and 2000. I, again, was doing a lot of campaigns during this period and worked on Senator Obama's presidential campaign in 2008.
I'm not sure if that was what you had just mentioned there, but in 1993 you joined the political consulting firm SKDK. Is that right?
Well, that firm at the time was known as Squire Knapp Oaks.
And would you intermittently leave that firm to work in various other places over the years and go back to it? Is that right?
That's correct.
What was your, and I'm sorry if you said it earlier, but what was your role at SKDK?
Well, when I entered the firm, I entered it as a senior vice president. And then I was made a partner in the firm, to the best of my recollection. Honestly, I think in 1998.
Sure. Is it fair to say that across your various positions, communications and strategies were generally the focus of your roles?
That is correct.
You mentioned the first time that you met then Senator Biden was in the 1980s. Do you recall specifically?
No, I don't.
Did you interact with Senator Biden in the 80s and 90s many times or just a few times?
Oh, and to the best of my recollection, just a few times.
And were these, committee hearings where you would hear him speak, or were these interactions directly with Senator Biden?
They were very much in the nature of, hello, Senator. Primarily when I was at the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee in the 1990 cycle, because Senator Biden was up for re-election. So, he would come to the group meetings of senators and things like that.
I understand. And you mentioned that, and I don't want to mischaracterize it, correct me if I misrepresent your testimony here, but I think you said that you didn't know that President Biden ever had a stutter until much later, and that to me that says he did not have a stutter or you didn't notice a stutter when you interact with then Senator Biden.
Well, I didn't know him very well. I didn't work for him. But that is correct. I really didn't know until I went to work for him.
How would you characterize his communication skills during that time when he was a senator?
Well, he had a reputation for making long speeches. He certainly, he was chairman of the Judiciary Committee when I worked for Senator Bradley. Bradley did not serve on any committees with Biden, but they had a pretty good personal relationship from having ridden the train together. So.
But you thought that his communication skills, outside of being long-winded, were good?
Again, I really wasn't in a position to judge. I didn't watch him very carefully.
So we'll skip ahead a little here to, you mentioned that you worked on President Obama's 2008 campaign, is that right?
That's correct.
And did you join in 2007-ish?
No, I joined it at the beginning of 2008.
Okay. What was your role on the 2008 campaign?
My role in the 2008 campaign was a role as a senior advisor with responsibility for communications, press, and research, and policy.
Did your relationship with then Senator and Vice Presidential candidate Biden change during this time? Did you start interacting with him more?
I interacted with him a little more, primarily around preparing him for his debate against Sarah Palin. I was part of that team.
And we'll talk a bit more about debate prep later, but just to touch on it a little bit, what did debate prep for that debate against Sarah Palin look like? How did you prepare him?
Well, I wasn't in charge of that debate prep, but it was, group meetings, talking through issues, mock debate, conversation after mock debate, fairly standard debate prep.
And how would you assess then Senator Biden's abilities during debate prep at that point?
This is the debate prep.
Against Sarah Palin
Yes,
in
indeed.
2008.
Yes.
I really don't remember having a strong impression of it one way or the other. So,
But it didn't strike you as memorably bad.
again, I'm having trouble remembering it. It was a long time ago. The debate itself ended up fine, so.
So you remember his performance?
Oh, I
in
do
that
remember
debate?
his performance in the debate.
And you said it was fine.
It was fine.
How else would you characterize his performance in that debate?
That is the characterization I'm giving. It was
Fine.
fine. Yeah,
His communication skills and his delivery were fine.
yes, mhm.
You mentioned this again as well earlier, but you then served as interim White House communications director during the Obama administration. Is that right?
I did in 2009 from, again, to the best of my recollection, the beginning of April through the end of the year.
I have around November. Does that sound right?
I left at the end of the year.
And then when you left at the end of 2009, did you return to SKDK or did you go somewhere else?
No, I returned to my firm.
During that time between the 2008 campaign and the 2012 campaign, did you maintain close contact with the Obama White House?
No, I think it's fair to say I had contact with friends who worked in the Obama White House. And having been part of that organization was involved primarily with the planning for 2012.
That organization being SKDK or?
No, I'm sorry, I apologize. Having been involved with the Obama campaign in 2008, after I left the White House, I would say my primary dealings with them were around starting to plan, 2012.
So you interacted with them every how often with people at the Obama White House?
Now that's a difficult question for me to answer accurately. I had very good friends who I'm sure I interacted with a great deal, although I can't give you any kind of numerical thing. And then in a sort of organized capacity, I don't remember how the structure was in terms of meetings, but I did periodically attend meetings on the political side.
Who were the friends that you were mentioning that were working at the Obama White House during these 2009 to 2012 years?
Well, Pete Rouse, who had been Senator Daschle's chief of staff, is a dear personal friend of mine and is someone with whom I would have had contact. Valerie Jarrett was a dear friend of mine. There were many friends of mine on that staff.
Did you interact with then Vice President Biden, same time period during that time?
No, I actually can't remember any interactions I had with Vice President Biden until 2012.
And at that point, you worked on the 2012 campaign, is that right?
I was an advisor to the 2012 campaign. I did not work full-time for the 2012 campaign.
Did you help President Obama and Vice President Biden prepare for their respective debates during the 2012 campaign?
I did.
I understand that you don't have a strong recollection of then Senator Biden's 2008 debate prep. Do you have a better recollection of his 2012 debate prep?
No, I don't remember specific issues as they came up. The one thing I remember from that debate prep was having come out of a very weak first debate that President Obama had, the sort of necessity for him to go out there and be very energetic to prosecute the case, energetically. And that's what we told him he had to do.
Are you talking about Obama or Biden?
No, I'm talking about Vice President Biden in his debate against Paul Ryan, because the first Obama Romney debate had not gone as well as we had hoped it would, and therefore the next debate was the vice presidential debate. And so we really saw Biden's performance as an opportunity to go put some energy back into the campaign.
And was Vice President Biden successful at doing that?
In my opinion, as a political observer and someone who worked on the campaign, yes.
What made him successful?
He was very energetic and very aggressive in the debate.
How would you say his communication skills were during the 2012 vice presidential debate?
Communication skills are a pretty broad category here. I would say his performance in the debate was strong.
Did he win that debate against then future Speaker Ryan?
Well, I certainly thought he did. I think there were those who disagreed, so.
I didn't know that they give out a winning award ticket.
We all talk about who wins debates, right? Yeah.
So after the 2012 campaign, did you go back to your firm SKDK again? Is that right?
Yes, I had been at the firm through the 2012 campaign. I was acting as a consultant to the Obama campaign, not as a full-time employee.
And to be clear, to go back, you were a full-time employee during the 2008 Obama campaign, is that right?
That is correct.
Do you recall how much you were paid for the 2008 campaign?
No, I don't recall exactly. I was paid whatever the senior staff on the campaign were paid. And we had a very cheap campaign manager.
You don't have I actually don't know what that position pays roughly. Do you have a range you could share?
I don't remember, but obviously the Obama FEC reports are available, so,
I'll ask it broader. Was it less than $4 million?
yes,
Was it less than $8 million?
yes,
All right.
to the best of my recollection.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. So you returned to you had been at your firm, but you, after the 2012 campaign, you were at your firm. Did you maintain close contact again with the Obama White House during the remainder of the Obama administration?
Again, I had friends there. I didn't have as close contact in terms of going to meetings or anything like that because we weren't looking at a re-election campaign. So I would say it was probably more, to the best of my recollection, it would be more personal contacts that I had with people at that point.
With your friends at the White House?
With my friends. Mm-hmm.
So you didn't interact with Vice President Biden during Obama's second term?
Boy, I do not remember interacting with him at all during the second term.
So then
I'm sorry, I did attend a Christmas party at the Vice President's residence during that period. So, just to be clear.
thank you.
So I think I have a picture of myself with Joe Biden from that period at a Christmas party.
Do you recall talking with Vice President Biden at that Christmas party?
I was in a photo line, so it was probably a very brief conversation.
And then you became a senior advisor on Joe Biden's 2020 presidential campaign, is that right?
Yes, I was advising the campaign in 2019 without having a formal paid role with the campaign. And did not take a leave from my firm to become a full-time employee of the campaign until 2020.
So eventually you were a full-time employee of the 2020?
Yes, I was.
And prior to that, while you were just advising it, was that just volunteer work?
It was to some extent volunteer work, yes.
And to the other extent, was that part of your SKDK role?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're asking.
You said that to some extent, prior to becoming a full-time employee on the 2020 campaign, you were to some extent volunteering. What did you mean by that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I also, my firm's direct mail unit was hired separately from me to do some direct mail for the Biden campaign, which during the primary was actually pretty non-existent because we had no money. So,
And in 2019 or 2020, did your interaction with then candidate Biden increase?
yes, it did.
Did it increase in 2019 while you were doing these direct mail operations and volunteering, or was that in 2020 that it increased?
It was in 2019. I was part of a strategy group.
And so how frequently would you interact with then candidate Biden during that time?
It's hard for me to characterize that accurately. There would be times when we would interact pretty regularly, certainly around the planning of the launch of the campaign. And then there were, weeks at a time when I would not speak with him directly.
We'll come back to a little bit more detail of,
Yeah.
again, each of the positions where you were directly working for President Biden or his campaigns. But I just want to flesh out the last couple of positions here. After the 2020 campaign, you were a senior advisor to President Biden from the beginning of the administration in January to around August. Is that right?
That's correct.
Why did you leave in August?
I hadn't been planning to go into the White House to begin with. I had already worked in the White House, wasn't necessarily looking for a White House role when I helped on the campaign. The president asked me to serve though, so. But I had told him it could only be for a limited amount of time.
So there was an agreed upon end date at the beginning, is that fair?
Yes,
What did you do? I'm sorry, you returned to the White House eventually in May of 2022 in the same role. Is that right?
it's a slightly different role. I served in 2021 as a temporary employee with a SGE, Special Government Employee. When I returned in May 2022, it was as a fully commissioned assistant to the president.
Assistant to the president?
Yes.
What was your, lack of a subtitle, assistant to the president, and what?
I actually didn't have an and,
Oh.
as far as I can remember. I think I just was an assistant to the president. Yes.
Your duties while you were an SGE, what were those duties?
To help advise the White House on communications, strategy, press strategy during those early days of the administration.
So when you returned as an assistant to the president, it was a different title, but is it fair to say that it was a similar role as when you had been an SGE?
I took on more managerial responsibilities when I returned in May of 2022.
And then you served from May of 2022 until after President Biden withdrew from the 2024 race, and you left at around July or August, is that right?
I left August 6th.
August 6th.
Yes.
A year ago yesterday. And you joined Future Forward, the main PAC supporting the Harris campaign at that point, is that right?
That's correct.
What was your role on the Future Forward PAC?
It was primarily to raise money and work on the political coordinated side because my 90-day cooling off period, which would have allowed me to work on the independent side, wasn't 90 days from when I left was gonna take me into November. So I was on the political coordinated side.
And forgive me for going out of order here, but for President Biden's 2024 campaign, you were a White House employee. You didn't have any paid role on the campaign, or?
No, I was a White House employee.
And are you currently employed by Future Forward?
I consult for Future Forward, yes.
And so you work at the same firm we've been discussing?
No, I did not return to my firm.
Okay. So you would advise or consult for Future Forward independently, is that fair?
That's correct.
I have one more campaign structure question. Is
Yes.
it common to have contingency bonuses based off the outcome of the election?
That is not uncommon in campaigns,
Thank you.
at least in my experience.
I did say I would do this. We're gonna go back into each of the positions that you had working for President Biden or candidate Biden. So in the 2020 presidential campaign, what were your responsibilities on that campaign?
In 2019, again, I was a consultant who was primarily in an advisory capacity, helping mostly in the communications, press, research area. Broader campaign strategy was driven by others. I would say that as the year went on, I became more and more involved with the campaign, and that in early 2020, I cannot remember exactly when, somewhere between the Iowa caucus, I can't remember exactly when. Then candidate Biden asked me to take on a larger role in terms of overall campaign management, which I did. And then after he had, locked up the nomination in, realistically speaking, in March of 2020, I returned to a different role, which was to be in charge of the convention, to obviously continue working with the communications and press operations, and to work, to be one of the liaisons with the transition operation.
Who did you report to in this role?
I reported to our campaign manager, Jennifer O'Malley Dillon, and to the candidate.
And you said a little bit earlier, you discussed your frequency of interaction with then candidate Biden. Is it fair to say that it did decrease with the onset of COVID-19? Is that right?
As I remember, having had a fairly intense period of engagement, once COVID hit and everybody went home, I had most of my interactions with Biden at that point became part of meetings and with structure.
When you say meetings,
I didn't travel with him or anything.
when you say meetings, do you mean in-person meetings or virtual meetings or both?
Virtual meetings.
And so prior to COVID, you had, I think you said deep interactions or frequent interactions with then candidate Biden. Is that fair?
During the 6 weeks that I was, running the campaign, for all intents and purposes, fairly frequent interactions with him.
Fairly frequent. During that time, how would you say then candidate Biden's communication skills were?
His performance as a candidate, when his back was against the wall, was a very good performance. He was very focused. He knew what he had to do. He went and executed extremely well.
And again, I know we discussed that at some point you became aware that President Biden had grown up struggling with a stutter. Is this when you found that out, when you were working on the 2020 campaign, or was it later?
No, I learned it working on the 2020 campaign. There was a large piece in, I believe, The Atlantic to the best of my recollection, it was in the Atlantic, by an author who also had a stutter and who had written about Biden and had interviewed him, I guess. It was a very long, very moving piece. But I also, had also learned about it, I think, from another staff member before that.
So you never, and I understand that you said that you didn't frequently interact with Senator Biden in the 1980s and 1990s, but you had interacted with him much more than the average American over the course of his various positions. Is that fair?
I think it would be fair to characterize my interactions with him as limited when he was vice president. And then once he became a candidate for president in 2020, more regularly.
And so you had these multiple interactions with Biden over the years, and then many interactions while he was a candidate, and you never noticed that he had a stutter until you read it in the media. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
When did you first personally observe President Biden stutter?
I don't remember, okay? And, it's likely he stuttered and I just didn't notice it because I wasn't looking for it. But I do not remember.
Were you eventually involved in discussions over which staffers would get which jobs in the eventual Biden White House?
I was involved in, to the best of my recollection, I was involved primarily around the areas where I'd had most responsibility in the campaign and where I knew the personnel the best, so press communications. Research.
Thank you. Do you recall specific people that you had a direct role in hiring?
Well, the president hired people. I did not have a direct role.
In advising the president to hire?
Because I spent a good chunk of the transition not planning to go into the White House, I was not as involved in discussions around the White House staff as I would have been if I had been planning to go into the White House from day one. So many of those decisions were made without my input.
During the 2020 campaign, did you or anyone else take steps to conceal then candidate Biden's cognitive decline or signs of his aging?
Well, I'd like to take issue with the cognitive decline piece of this. We did not see cognitive decline. I did not see it. I did not experience that. I had a candidate who had won an improbable primary victory and then won the presidency in 2020.
So you don't feel as though you concealed then candidate Biden from the press or the media or otherwise?
The candidate debated in the primaries. Don't recall the exact number of times, but something, maybe 9 or 10 times for the Democratic Party to see. He debated twice in the general election. He did interviews. Obviously, COVID limited the amount of time he could be out there campaigning, but the candidate was out there for people to see.
I'm gonna phrase it a similar way, and Suzanne can get mad at me again. Did President Biden win both 2020 debates against President Trump?
In my opinion, and from what I observed, yes. And I will say that politically, we felt the debates were very beneficial to the Biden candidacy in 2020.
And just for clarity, in defining win, you spent a lot of time with dial groups in real time, you spent a lot of time with polling after the fact. Is that how you would define win, that the dial group showed that the president did a good job or they were appreciating his message?
I think what our research showed was that he had strengthened his position.
Did you have a role in preparing presidential candidate Biden for, during the 2020 campaign for his debates?
His primary debates?
Any debate?
Yes.
So the primary debates only?
No, I was also involved in the general election debates.
Do you recall President Biden's, then candidate Biden's performance during those debate preps?
I only recall a couple specifically. I certainly recall generally. You know, he would, that, you know, the debates during the primaries were very different from a general election debate. They started off with huge stages of candidates. There were 10 candidates on the stage. So they weren't really classic debates, and you prepared people differently, so.
Did you see any change in President Biden, then candidate Biden's abilities from when you had prepared him while he was running to be vice president in 2008 and 2012 for his debates?
That's a hard question for me to answer because his debates in 2008 and 2012 were against Republican opponents and they were one-on-one. You know, the primary debates we were preparing him for were more like forums. They were multi-candidate and they were against Democrats. So that's a very different dynamic to begin with.
Sure.
So in terms of change from 2008 and 2012, it's a hard one for me to judge.
I can appreciate that the format was.
It's apples and oranges.
I can appreciate that the format was different, but in terms of his style or communication abilities or his delivery or forgetting the substance of an answer or anything of that sort of genre, did anything change regarding that from 2008, 2012, going to 2020?
Again, to the best of my recollection, I think it was pretty much the same. Some of the primary debates were better than others.
Okay, and then after the 2020 election, or I guess my understanding is sometimes it starts before, but did you have a role on the transition team in that time?
Yes, I was one of the co-chairs of the transition.
What does a co-chair for the transition team do?
I'm sure every administration is different. What I did primarily on the transition was to help evaluate potential cabinet, sub-cabinet nominees, as well as to work on the development, the policy development of what would become the Recovery Act.
The American Rescue
I
Plan?
mean, sorry, the rescue plan. I make the same mistake he does.
I understand. So which cabinet members were you involved in vetting or evaluating, if you said?
No, I was not involved in vetting.
Apologies.
And I don't remember exactly. I do and can tell you that I was not involved in the discussions around the Attorney General.
You were not
No,
involved?
no. I'm not a lawyer, and that was a very small group of people.
What was your husband, Bob Bauer, involved in those discussions?
Is that really relevant to this investigation?
Are you instructing the witness not to answer?
Let's go off the record.
So you were a co-chair of the Biden and Harris transition team, and you said you were involved in preparing policy ideas that would eventually become the American Rescue Plan. Is that fair?
The policy team had the primary responsibility. I was more involved, as is appropriate, and as I remember, with sort of communications, political strategy on it.
And as part of that role, or separately from that role, you were also involved in picking or evaluating potential cabinet picks for President Biden. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then we discussed this earlier, you joined the Biden White House as a special government employee
That's correct.
in January of 2021, right at the beginning of the administration, is that right?
In January 21st, yes.
During that first stint, as a special government employee before you left at the end of 2021, were you one of President Biden's closest advisors?
It's a hard question. I was certainly part of a group of senior advisors that he met with on a regular basis and who met with each other to develop recommendations for the president.
And forgive me if you said earlier, but when were you, I know you said that you weren't planning on working at the White House and you stayed longer than you initially anticipated. Did you say that as well?
I'm not sure I said it, but I did stay a little longer than I'd initially planned to, yes.
So who approached you to do that job, or how did you wind up with that role?
I'm sorry, with the role in 2021,
As a special government employee beginning in 2021, how did you wind up with that role?
to the best of my recollection, Ron Klain, who was going to be the incoming White House Chief of Staff, called me and told me that the president-elect was going to call me and ask me to do this. So he wanted to give me a heads up, but he told me that I needed to do it. And then the president called me.
What did you discuss on that call?
He told me that I had been a part of the campaign and that he needed me at the beginning of the administration, given the challenges, COVID, all of the economic stresses on the country, all of the things that he was walking into as president, and that he needed me at the beginning of the administration to help.
Did you discuss with President Biden what your role would be specifically during that call?
No, I did not.
Did you discuss the fact that you were planning to leave at the end of the year on that call?
No, I don't
Or
remember.
during that year?
I don't remember, okay? I do remember being clear with Ron that it would be a temporary thing.
And as we discussed, you returned in May of 2022, this time as assistant to the president.
Correct.
Why did you return?
It's a great question. I ask myself all the time. It was very clear that the president was going to have an extremely difficult re-election, given everything going on in the country, kind of the post-COVID period, the economy, and I felt a responsibility to come back.
So you primarily came back out of concern that President Biden that there were external issues causing President Biden to have a difficult re-election?
I'm not sure that's what she said.
No, I think what it's accurate to say is that I came back just given the challenges facing the White House and my feeling of responsibility to help address them.
And none of those challenges facing the White House or President Biden were with regard to his age or cognitive abilities?
I want to be clear. We didn't have concerns, and I did not have concerns about his cognitive abilities or his ability to lead this country as president, his ability to make the decisions that only a president can make. We took those decisions to him. He made those decisions. I think he was a strong president for this country at a time when we needed a strong president. So that was not a concern that I had then. It's not a concern I had throughout his presidency.
Understand that, but if voters had concerns about that, that would potentially be a problem for his 2024, his future 2024 re-election campaign. Was that a factor in your returning to the White House?
the fact that we were facing a 2024 reelection campaign that was going to be very tough for a variety of reasons was certainly a factor in my decision to return to the White House.
A variety of reasons.
Yes,
including
the
his age.
economy, age had been an issue in the 2020 campaign. Obviously, the voters chose him despite any concerns they might have had about age because they were looking for his leadership. We knew that it would continue to be an issue, but we also believed, and I believed, that what he had accomplished as president, the fights he was fighting for the American people, were going to be a strong platform to take him to a re-election campaign.
Why'd you return to the White House and not just go work for the campaign?
I had played a role in the White House of helping to kind of coordinate and work closely with the other senior advisors. And I felt it was a better place for me to be, particularly because when an incumbent president is running for re-election, so much of the outcome of that race really does hinge on his performance as president. And hopefully someday her performance as president.
I missed the date that you returned to the White House for that stint. Do you recall?
I returned as an assistant to the president in May 2022.
At that point, was special counsel her already appointed?
Oh, no. Mm-mm. No, I'll double check this, but I do not believe that at that point we knew about the documents.
Okay, thank you.
So you returned to the White House to, in part, help the president in terms of his communications, working communications to prepare his narrative going forward to the 2024 campaign. Is that right?
Well, as I remember it, there was also a huge piece of business around the president's accomplishments and making sure that the administration was communicating those accomplishments in an effective way, and that his schedule, his interviews, his political meetings, his outreach, all of it was coordinated around what he was doing and what he'd gotten done. So it was not just a narrative, it was very much around making sure we had an administration-wide effort.
During that brief hiatus, though, I think you said earlier that you were just back at your firm during those however many months that is, 6 months or so. Is that right?
As I remember, there was one exception to that, which was I entered the White House again for, I believe, 9 days as an unpaid SGE during the period of time when the president was heading into a State of the Union and the Deputy Chief of Staff's father had passed away and she was on compassionate leave.
So this was in early 2022?
As I remember, it was probably early March, but I don't remember the exact dates.
And excluding those 9 days while you were working for the White House, did you still have a role in White House communications from afar?
I did not have a formal role in White House communications. I did not participate in regular meetings, for example. So, obviously people would call me and I would talk to them, but I didn't have a formal role.
So you advised on communications, is that correct?
I would advise if people asked for advice.
How frequently would that occur during that hiatus?
I really don't remember very well, but it was not that frequently.
Rather than starting a new topic, why don't we go off record there?
The time is 11:25 a.m. Ms. Dunn, I want to thank you again for your time today and for agreeing to speak to the committee. During the previous hour, I believe my Republican colleagues entered into the record what is Majority Exhibit number 2, which is a statement from you. I'd like to give you the opportunity to read that statement.
Thank you. I have known President Biden since he was a senator, but did not serve on his staff or work for him directly until the 2020 presidential campaign. Following his election, I served as a senior advisor to the president from January to August 2021, and again from May 2022 to August 2024. In that role, I focused primarily on press and communication strategy. I brought to this job past experience with West Wing operations from my role as a senior advisor during the Obama administration. From what I experienced and observed in the White House, President Biden made all of the important decisions expected of someone serving as the President of the United States. As is typical and necessary for the role, President Biden relied on senior advisors to execute his priorities and manage the day-to-day operations that allow the White House to run effectively, but his authority and involvement in decision-making was clear. In my meetings and other interactions with him, President Biden was engaged on the substance, editing press statements and working with us to map out communication strategy. Before scheduling a press interview or releasing a statement under his name, we sought his approval, and he was an active participant in the preparation of his speeches and public statements. While I observed that President Biden aged physically during his time in office, which is something that happens to every president, he remained throughout my interactions with him fully engaged and clear in his direction and supervision, his ability to probe, to find the weakness in an argument, and to make well-informed decisions did not change during my time in the White House. President Biden also was appropriately accessible to the press. According to presidential communications scholar Martha Joint Kumar, professor emeritus at Towson University, over his 4-year term, President Biden conducted 37 press conferences, as well as 151 interviews and 679 informal question and answer sessions with the press. He conducted numerous public meetings and events during this time as well. With 679 informal question and answer sessions, President Biden had more of these interactions with reporters than almost any other president over a 4-year term, going back to Ronald Reagan. I did not observe the White House staff making key decisions or exercising the powers of the presidency without President Biden's knowledge or consent. The president made it clear that decisions rested with him, and White House staff brought issues to him for him to decide. I believed strongly then, and I believe just as strongly today, that Joe Biden was an effective president who accomplished many important things for the American people. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Dunn. In the past hour, I believe you testified to this fact a couple times, but I just want to make sure the record is very clear. At any time during the Biden presidency or during the 2024 campaign, did you have concerns that President Biden was suffering from cognitive decline?
I did not have concerns that the president was suffering from cognitive decline throughout the time I served in the White House.
And did you at any time during the Biden presidency believe that President Biden was unable to execute the duties of the office of president?
I did not.
We'll just quickly go to a discussion you had with majority staff in the last hour about President Biden's speech impediment, or to discuss his stutter more colloquially. You had said that you only more recently became aware of his stutter. Just for the record, and we'll put an article into the record to this effect, titled "A Pioneer, a President, and a Legacy," that President Biden first publicly addressed his speech impediment in 2004 at a speech before the National Stuttering Association. Just so you know. Let's mark this as Exhibit A. This same article quotes President Biden at another speech, a 2016 speech. He was talking about his stutter and why he didn't talk more openly about it for a while. He said, I remember to this day how stuttered felt, how dehumanizing, how embarrassing, how much it put into question in my own mind as well my capabilities. In another speech he said, I was afraid that if people knew I stuttered, they would have thought something was wrong with me. I too thought I was handicapped. You may know now, given that this was an issue during the more recent campaigns, that roughly 70 million people worldwide suffer from a speech impediment or a stutter. Are you aware of anything like that, generally?
Yes, I learned a great deal about this issue in the course of working for President Biden.
And you also, I think, probably have seen firsthand how President Biden's speech impediment may have been used as part of, the rough and tumble politics during his campaigns and during his presidency. Is that probably right?
It is correct to say that sometimes when he would get stuck on a word, those videos would get widely circulated and used to mock him, which was painful. I've also seen the president spend time after events with people who stutter, who come just to see him. And in 2020, one of those people, a boy in New Hampshire, ended up making a speech at the Democratic convention. So,
Your statement you just read, you said that President Biden was, quote, fully engaged and clear in his direction, end quote. Would it be fair to say that nothing about your experience with President Biden personally, his speech impediment, or anything that you've just said in that past hour about President Biden's speech impediment in any way contradicts or undercuts your testimony that the president was fully engaged and clear in his direction?
the president was fully engaged and clear in his direction, whether it was on policy, whether it was on press, whether it was politically, whatever the issue was. He was engaged in details to a great extent, sometimes details I didn't think a president needed to be involved in, but he was very involved and clear with us what he wanted to say, where he wanted to go, what he wanted to do.
And you can only speak for yourself, but just so the record is clear, nothing you said in the last hour about President Biden's speech impediment you meant to in any way cause shame, embarrassment, disparagement, anything on the 70 million people around the world who suffer from a speech impediment.
I would be so upset if anything that I said about the president's speech impediment was ever interpreted that way. You know, he is someone who inspires people because of his overcoming that speech impediment when he was a child. And he's talked about this and written about it a great deal since I've gotten to know him more closely. And I would not ever want anyone to interpret that as disparagement or a question about whether someone who has a stutter or a speech impediment or any kind of issue is disqualified from serving as president.
Ms. Dunn, in the prior hour, my Republican colleagues asked you a few questions about campaign compensation. Do you recall that?
Oh, I do.
And in particular, they asked you about a $4 million compensation. Do you recall that?
I do.
I'd like to enter into the record what will be Minority Exhibit B. This is a Daily Beast article dated October 15th, 2024, entitled Donald Trump's Campaign Manager, Chris LaCivita's LLC, Multi-Million Payday Review. Now, we don't need to go through the entirety of this article, it's rather lengthy, but I'd like to read you the first paragraph of this article. It states, quote, "The consulting firm of Donald Trump's White House campaign's co-manager has raked in $19.2 million and counting from the Republican nominee's political operation in just 2 years, the Daily Beast has learned." Ms. Dunn, is $19.2 million more than $4 million?
Yes.
I'll also note for the record that in the third paragraph here, the Daily Beast notes that Mr. Lasavita's consulting firm was to receive $150,000 bonus if Trump happened to win the election. Right, you off the record. Ms. Dunn, I understand you have something you wanted to state for the record.
Yes, I apologize. When I went through my government service earlier, I left off 4 months that I worked for the National Security Council in 1979
And
as a staff assistant.
on that note, I neglected to ask you about your.
And all of her, sort of memory is to the best of her recollection.
Yes,
of her
this is to the
very
best of my
extensive
recollection.
Yeah.
Sure, and we understand that. Thank you for clarifying. And on that note, I never asked you, where did you attend college?
I attended college at the University of Maryland.
And what year did you graduate?
I didn't.
And so was your time at the National Security Council, was that during college or?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Thank you. We left off during our last hour discussing your role in the Biden White House. Just quickly, you know, how often did you interact with President Biden during your time in the White House?
No. Again, this is an imprecise thing to discuss. You know, I would generally see the president, 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes more. If there was a speech coming up, sometimes less.
And was that fairly consistent
And
throughout
that's-
the administration?
Well, to the best of my recollection, it was fairly consistent. There were times when we were preparing for something major, again, where I would have a huge amount of contact with him. And there were times when he was preparing for a foreign trip, I would have very little.
Do any times stand out to you where you had less access or where you spent less time with President Biden?
To the best of my recollection, there are no times that really stand out. I was not as involved in national security policy as others were, though. So during intense national security times, I would have less contact.
You said, I think in your opening statement last hour with my minority colleagues, that press and communication strategy, that was sort of the bulk of your role in the White House. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair to characterize the bulk of my role as press and communications. But obviously, as a senior advisor, we all talked with each other.
Did you play a role in responding to what some might call blunders or gaffes made by President Biden during that time?
Now, as I remember, the press and communications operations would have the end product of dealing with those, but a broader group would deal with that.
So you were involved?
Oh, I was involved, yes.
I believe you were not at the White House. You were not at the White House in March of 2022. Is that correct? Because you came back in May.
Again, I don't remember exactly when I was there. I was there for a 9-day period in March, either late February or early March. So I apologize, I don't remember exactly.
Were you at the White House when Russia invaded Ukraine on March 26th?
Let's see, I do not believe I was. But again, I apologize. That is a time when my memory is hazy for when I was in and when I was out. So.
I understand. I think you said you had some amount of interaction with White House staff even during that hiatus, again, excluding the 9-day period where you were back. Soon after Russia invaded Ukraine, President Biden spoke at the Royal Castle in Warsaw, Poland. President Biden stated, "For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Do you recall that happening?
I remember the speech, yes.
Were you shocked by President Biden's remarks?
I don't remember being shocked by them, no.
Do you believe that President Biden knew he was saying or implying to call for the ousting of Putin?
No, I think my rule has always been that at the end of the day, presidents set the policy and presidents get to say these things.
Do you think it was an intentional statement?
I have no way of knowing that. I was not around that Poland trip at all, so.
And in your limited communications advising role, I think that's fair based on your testimony. Did you have any role in advising on the strategy for responding to these remarks?
I don't remember having any role around those particular remarks. And given that they were national security, I think the national security team would have taken the lead on that.
On May 23rd, 2022, speaking alongside the Japanese Prime Minister in Tokyo, former then President Biden was asked, "Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?" Biden responded, "Yes." The reporter responded surprised, "You are?" And President Biden stated, "That's the commitment we made." Were you consulted at all? Let's start here. You were in the White House again at this point on May 23rd, 2022.
I had returned to the White House by then.
Were you involved in any strategy or decisions otherwise related to the response to these comments by President Biden?
No, I do not remember being involved in those conversations. I think, again, I think those conversations were primarily out of the National Security Council, and that National Security press staff took the lead.
So do you know specifically who's in charge of that?
I don't remember who was in charge at the time, but at the end of the day, Jake Sullivan, who was our national security advisor.
Do you believe that President Biden knew what he was saying when he made this statement was at odds with longstanding U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity?
I believe President Biden, as president, was able to set U.S. policy and to say these things if he believed it was in the national interest.
Regardless of whether he was able to, do you think he knew what he was saying was at odds with longstanding U.S. policy?
I can't make that judgment. He certainly was well aware of what U.S. policy had been, having been chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, vice president and president.
Understanding you said you were not deeply involved in national security discussions, but had you ever been involved in a conversation with President Biden about strategic ambiguity or U.S. Taiwan policy?
I do not remember being involved in a discussion with President Biden on U.S. Taiwan policy or strategic ambiguity.
On June 20th, 2023, President Biden attended a fundraiser with California Governor Gavin Newsom. During the fundraiser, President Biden called Chinese President Xi Jinping a dictator. Sort of the same question, were you involved in any discussions or strategy for responding to these comments?
Let's see. As I recall, I was not on the trip. And again, it was primarily national security that had the lead in figuring out the response.
Do you believe that President Biden was in command of himself or his remarks when he called Xi Jinping a dictator?
I believe President Biden said what he meant to say.
So you believe that President Biden meant to call Xi Jinping a dictator?
I believe presidents say these things and that they get elected to say these things.
And similar question from the last one, had you been involved in any discussions with President Biden about whether Xi Jinping was a dictator or should be publicly called one?
You know, I was not, to the best of my recollection, I was not in a discussion about that. And as I said earlier, I really didn't play a significant role in national security communications. I was aware of them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We understand there was a daily meeting of sort of the senior-most staff around 8 a.m. every morning. Were you involved in those meetings?
Yes, I was.
And there was a second sort of broader meeting of the other senior staff around 8:40 or whenever the first one wrapped up. Is that fair also?
The times changed in the course of this administration, so I don't want to be held to times. But yes, there was a smaller meeting and a larger meeting.
And you were generally at both of these meetings?
Yes.
Who else was in the earlier senior-most staff meeting generally?
Senior advisors, you know, if national security was a big issue, Jake Sullivan or somebody else from NSC would often drop by to give us an update on what was happening. Annie Tomasini, you know, Anthony Bernal representing the First Lady. You know, Jen O'Malley Dillon was there when she was Deputy Chief of Staff. But once she left to become campaign manager, she didn't participate.
And the broader meeting was sort of department heads, is that fair?
Yeah, the broader meeting was the full senior staff of the White House, yes.
What was the usual topic of the earlier senior-most staff meeting?
Now, there wasn't a usual topic because there's really not a normal day in the White House. So, you know, sometimes it would be the president's schedule, you know, what he was doing that day. Is the speech pinned down? Do we know what we're doing here? Sometimes it would be an update on Congress and legislation, what was going on there, what needed to happen. You know, again, it was kind of dependent on the day, but it was an opportunity for the strategic group to meet in the morning, kind of talk to each other about whatever was front of mind.
During these senior-most staff meetings, were there ever discussions of President Biden's health, his cognition, or his age?
None that I can remember. In terms of cognitive, I can certainly say that age is a polling issue. I can't give you what day we discussed it, but I'm sure we discussed it.
And not to go back to this sort of bifurcation of age and sort of the things that come with age, but you're sort of saying again that age was a polling issue. Did you all at that time not see concerns about cognition, whether those come with age or not, as being a polling issue as well, worthy of discussion?
What we were discussing was strategically what we needed to get done. And as I recall, to the best of my recollection, you know, the issue around age was one we discussed. I do not recall any specific discussions around cognitive issues.
And so the discussions around the president's age, were those only discussions of public perceptions of his age, or were there concerns from within the staff as well?
No, as I remember, there were very much discussions around public perception and addressing public perceptions and concerns.
And to be more specific about public perception, did that include conversations about the perception of cabinet members, members of Congress, party leaders, anyone like that about President Biden's age?
I'm not sure I understand exactly what this question is.
During these senior-most staff meetings, did you ever have discussions about cabinet members, members of Congress, or party leaders being concerned about President Biden's age?
You know, I can't remember any specific discussions of that kind.
And then, Same question for the broader meeting. Did any of those topics I just asked you about, did those come up at the broader meeting at 8:40-ish?
As I remember, the 8:40 meeting was more for people to report in what the various parts of the White House were doing that day. So it was a coordination meeting.
And when those staff reported in, you don't recall any instances where they were reporting in, hearing or otherwise dealing with concerns about President Biden's age, health, or cognition?
No, I do not remember that.
During either of these meetings, these daily meetings, were there ever discussions of executive decisions that had been made or were to be made in the future?
Yes. Those, the senior advisors played, and the entire senior White House staff played an important role in getting those decisions to the president's desk.
And so there were related discussions during both of those meetings frequently?
Yes.
During your time at the White House, what was your understanding of the process for getting approval from President Biden on an executive decision?
When you talk about executive decision, are you talking about an executive order? Are you talking about something a cabinet agency is doing? I mean, there are a lot of executive decisions that get made.
Executive orders is certainly one. Pardons, clemency decisions, legislation that he would be signing, anything of that nature.
Do you want to maybe speak to something that you're aware of, a topic that you're aware of?
I'm terrible at remembering specific
I'll
ones.
split up
Yeah,
the
split it up.
compound question.
Thank you.
Were you involved at all in the decision-making of approving legislation?
Of whether or not the president would sign legislation.
Yes.
By and large, I was not. By the time legislation got to a point where it was passing this body and the Senate, generally speaking, whether the president was going to sign or veto it would have become clear.
And your involvement in signing or vetoing legislation would be more from a comms perspective than the policy perspective?
Wait, you're asking if she was involved in signing or vetoing legislation?
In the decision-making process around it, would you come in and say, from a comms perspective, this is what we're looking at, versus a discussion regarding whether or not the changes in the rescue plan were good changes?
No. As I remember, I was primarily involved in giving my best judgment on how things, would play with our party, with various constituencies, with the press.
Right. And then were you involved in the decisions of whether or not to issue executive orders?
Again, as I remember, executive orders were, we would discuss them at senior advisors, but by and large, that process was helmed by Bruce Reed. And they a lot of times came through cabinet agencies, through the cabinet process to Bruce's desk.
What about pardons or clemency?
Pardons and clemency was that process was led by the White House counsel's office. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that the recommendations to the president on pardons and clemencies were developed by the White House counsel's office, that a group of which I was one of the people would look at them, and then the recommendations would go to the president for his decisions.
And I'm trying to tie a bow on this, and I hate hypotheticals. I know I'm going to get hit for asking a hypothetical, but in the situation that legislation, I'll use executive order because it doesn't involve Article 1. The executive order process is happening, people are going back and forth with agencies on what the policy looks like, back and forth with the president and other advisors on what the policy looks like. My understanding of what you said is that you would be involved in some of those discussions, but primarily from a communications and press perspective. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair characterization. My role in those things were prepared for a recommendation to the president. Often, I didn't know about some of them. I mean, it just didn't rise to the level where I was paying attention to them.
Thank you.
So, did you ever observe President Biden reviewing the decision book or memos, decision memos regarding an executive action?
As I remember it, that I did a few times on Air Force One. And, but I, by and large, was not in the room when he was making those decisions. He had a decision book, a notebook where memos would go into it. He often also would talk to the policy people who had been directly involved in the development of the policy and ask them questions.
So who would be in the room while President Biden reviewed those memos or that book?
Well, if he was reviewing as I remember, a lot of those memos got reviewed at night. He would take the notebook home with him and come back the next day, and memos would come back out of the Oval Office. Sometimes, well, I've been asked not to speculate, but based on my experience there, sometimes the chief of staff, often Bruce Reed, if it was in the foreign policy sphere, Jake Sullivan, the appropriate staff people.
And so you never played a role in physically giving the decision book or decision memos to President Biden for his review?
I don't want to say never, because I did give him decision memos that were around press interviews and communications pieces. Whether we would issue a statement, those would be decision memos that would have a yes, no, let's discuss on them. So I don't want to say never.
So it was a similar process to get President Biden's approval for press-related actions as well?
We would follow the formal process. Obviously, press being what it is, there were times when we would just have to walk into the Oval Office and hand him a statement and let him look at it and make whatever changes he wanted. But if we had a lead time for it, we would definitely follow the decision, as I recall. So, the decision book.
So outside of press or communications, do you recall an instance where you physically gave President Biden the decision book or decision memos?
I do not recall one, so.
And same question, do you recall ever receiving the decision book or decision memos back from President Biden after his review for executive actions?
You mean outside of press and communications?
Yes, ma'am.
I do not remember ever doing that, no.
I know you said Mr. Reed would have been more involved in executive orders. Were you ever involved in in the decision process for an executive order?
Well, ever is such a big word, okay? So I do not remember any specific times that I was beyond the kind of press communications piece. I do not recall being involved in the policy discussions or policy recommendations beyond sort of my portfolio.
So the decision to mandate COVID-19 vaccines for members of the armed forces, you weren't involved in the decision meetings or the decision memos?
I do not remember being part of the decision memos. I do remember being part of discussions around the communication strategy around that.
So when did you first learn of President Biden's intention to mandate the COVID-19 vaccine for members of the armed forces?
I don't know. I don't remember, I'm sorry.
Were you part of any conversations regarding possible pardons or clemency decisions?
I was, yes. The staff discussions. I never had a discussion with the president about the recommendations that came out of White House Counsel. So I'll just give one note of context here, which is that the ones that I was involved in were the ones that were looking at people in federal prisons serving long periods of time for relatively minor drug offenses, or who under current drug law would have been released, but were being held under previous law. So they were consistent with keeping the campaign pledge that the president had made.
So to be clear, the only pardon or clemency decisions you were directly involved with were these decisions for marijuana-related offenses?
That is correct.
And just to clarify, I think you keep saying she was involved in the decision. Obviously, the president makes the decision. She keeps saying that she was involved in a discussion at a staff level related to the recommendation made to the president.
Sure.
So I just want to clarify that and have you clarify that so that we don't have some confusion on the record from the language.
Thank you.
You had left the White House and went to the vice president's campaign in early August 2024.
I didn't go to the vice president's
You
campaign, I went to the super PAC.
Yes, sorry, my
Yeah.
apologies. On December 1st, the president pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, and then at the end of the term pardoned a number of people. Were you involved at all in discussions regarding the president pardoning his son?
I do not remember being part of those discussions, except to the extent that the press was asking if he would, and we asked him.
And he said no.
And he
at that
said no.
point. You gave an interview to CNN where you said the White House was really not a part of this process. It was a process that was done very much internally with the family and with the defense lawyers. How did you know that if you weren't involved?
You know, I don't remember saying that, but any knowledge I had would have been secondhand. And I probably, if I said that, probably shouldn't have.
And you eventually said that you did agree with pardoning, his decision to pardon his son, but disagreed with the way it was done, the timing and the attack on the judicial system. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Could we see what you're reading from, or
Yeah,
the article?
I have this one. It's fine. I'm gonna go off the record for a minute. From CNN Politics from December 11th, 2024, discussing Ms. Dunn's comments at the December 4th New York Times Deal Book Summit. Ms. Dunn, we talked about it a little bit before, but I want to make sure that you saw the exact quote. I asked you about your quote here on the second page. The White House was really not a part of this process. It was a process that was done very much internally with the family and with defense lawyers, and you said you probably heard that secondhand. Is that true?
Yeah, to the best of my recollection, I would not have had firsthand knowledge of that.
And then 2 paragraphs up, you said, I do not agree with the way it was done, I don't agree with the timing, and I don't agree frankly with the attack on the judicial system, clarifying the timing, the argument, and sort of rationale. Can you explain a little bit more what you meant about why you didn't agree with the timing? We'll take each clause on its own.
Well, I made it clear that I didn't disagree with the pardon per se for Hunter Biden, who, and I said, as I recall, I said that I didn't think he should go to jail. But I think my argument, as I remember, was more with the statement that was issued by the president at the time. And also the timing, that this was the first one, so, and freestanding.
I am going to paraphrase, so if your memory is better than mine, please correct me. Part of the president's statement was that he issued the pardon because he thought it was a politically motivated prosecution on his son. Is that fair?
I think that is fair, yes.
So is that part of the statement that you disagreed with?
As you know, as I remember, that would have been part of the statement that I had issue with, given that the president had been careful for his 4 years in office to really avoid attacking the Justice Department or Justice Department officials.
And it was a special counsel that was prosecuting Mr. Biden, is that correct?
Yes, it was.
Which has some degree of independence from the Attorney General. Not as much as an independent counsel, which I learned last night as well. But
Yes, there had been a special counsel, as I remember, appointed, I do not remember when he was appointed, so.
Thank you. We're gonna shift a little bit and I'll go back to Peter, but just wanna ask some baseline questions, regarding, the auto pen. Did you have any role in approving the use of the auto pen?
I did not.
Did you ever authorize the use of the auto pen?
I did not.
Did anyone ever tell you to use the auto pen?
No, nobody did. Can I just clarify that I certainly sent letters over to the Presidential Correspondence Unit, congratulatory letters, which I believe were auto-penned.
And that's one of the categories that I believe is routinely auto pen.
That is very routinely, but I just want to be clear that I would have made those requests.
Was there some kind of directive outlining that was a routine use of the auto pen?
I don't remember one, so.
You don't remember a memo saying, I know based off previous witness testimony that President Biden never auto penned any legislation, but did auto pen executive orders and then kind of some of the, or most of the routine correspondence. But you don't recall a memo or anything from the chief of staff saying we can use an auto pen on X, Y, and Z?
I do not remember seeing any such memo.
So we'll switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
We've talked about already today some of your experience with preparing President Biden in various debates prior to his presidency, as well as President Obama while a candidate and a president. But you also assisted President Biden in debate preparation for the 2024 campaign. Is that right?
Yes, I think it is fair to say I played less of a role than I had in 2020. But I did play Dana Bash, the CNN moderator, in the mock debates and was part of the discussions afterwards.
And was your husband Robert Bauer also involved in the debate prep?
Yeah, I believe it's been widely reported that he was.
Who played Jake Tapper?
Ben Bolt. Okay. Also reported.
Oh, I haven't seen the whole,
Okay.
thank you.
Did you think it was a good idea at the time for President Biden to debate President Trump?
Yes, I did think that it was a good idea for us to have the early debate.
The early debate or to have a debate at all? I understand that those are kind of two different questions at some point.
I think that's an accurate characterization. But I was a proponent of, once the decision had been made that there would be debates, I was a proponent of the early debate, as indeed all of the senior advisors were.
And why were you a proponent of doing an early debate?
We had seen success coming out of the State of the Union and the president's performance there. As I remember, we felt that the best reassurance to voters about Joe Biden was for them to hear and see Joe Biden. We had a race that was seen as a referendum on the president that we needed to turn into a choice between the president and Donald Trump. And the political waters were deteriorating. We had thought there would be a more robust Republican primary contest. There was not. And I am sure I'm leaving reasons out, but those were primary reasons, that we needed those big moments.
And you needed to do them earlier. Well, why?
Well, we felt that given the fact that the Republican nomination had been wrapped up and it was a two-person race, we felt that the president would benefit from the comparison with Trump as he had in 2020.
I think you also used the word reassurance about President Biden. What did people need to be reassured about?
Well, I think, I don't recall personally using that word, but, as I mentioned earlier, we found that the best, our best argument for reelection was people seeing Joe Biden, so.
Do you think that the American people needed reassurance about President Biden's age, cognitive abilities, physical health?
Well, I'm gonna split off age from the other two, as I have been, because it was a very, what people needed to see was a president who was ready to keep fighting for them, and they needed to see him in public. We did a lot of things to accomplish this, but there was nothing that was going to be as effective as side by side with Donald Trump.
Did the release of Special Counsel Herr's report have any effect on your opinion about having a debate at all or having it earlier?
As I recall, it certainly, made me feel that that having a debate and having it earlier made sense. But the other important piece was the president's performance at the State of the Union, which we really did see as politically very beneficial, and looking for ways to replicate that energy.
So the release of the report did play some role in your calculations?
As I recall, it did play some role, yes.
And again, you've bifurcated age from these other concerns. But in Special Counsel Herr's report on page 6, which this is a very widely reported line, so we can introduce it if you'd like, but I can read it for you here. Special Counsel Herr wrote, "We have also considered that at trial, Mr. Biden would likely present himself to a jury as he did during our interview of him as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory." So is that your recollection of, did I read that correctly?
How would she know you read that correctly?
Would you like me to introduce you?
Sure. I mean, I don't think she's going to dispute the quote. I'm just not sure that she can answer the specific question you asked.
Instead of handing out 400 pages, we can just phrase it that way. Do you dispute the accuracy of that quote?
I mean, that certainly is the quote I remember, so,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. And I only ask because, again, in terms of bifurcating age from cognitive abilities, Special Counsel Herr does not simply say that President Biden is an elderly man. He says that he believes that President Biden is an elderly man with a poor memory. So did memory or cognition really not play any role in shaping your advice surrounding having the debate earlier?
The decision to have a debate earlier and the recommendation to the president, which he ultimately agreed to, was based very much on the politics of the debate. Her report was some of it. The State of the Union was some of it. The overall political situation was some of it. And above all, the need to make this a two-person race as opposed to a referendum.
I want to ask a little bit about the Herr report because it goes to, I think there was a lot of reporting that line in particular, there were a lot of attempts to get it taken out of the report. When the classified documents were discovered, you were already back at the White House, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Were you involved in discussions on how to respond to their discovery?
So I may need you to clarify that question because obviously there were there were legal discussions around that, which I was not really involved in, not being a lawyer. And then there was a communications discussion, which I was involved in.
In the communications discussion, were you involved in whether or not to proactively reveal that classified documents had been discovered at the president's home and office?
As I remember, I was involved in that discussion.
Who else was involved in that discussion?
The White House counsel's office, primarily, along with the White House, the president's personal lawyers.
And at that discussion, what was your advice?
Her advice on it.
Whether or not to proactively reveal the discovery of classified documents?
You know, when it comes to communication around legal issues, I tend to let the lawyers kind of make the first decisions on what they think. They felt that this was a fairly routine thing that they preferred to try to work out with the Department of Justice and with with the archives, and to see if we couldn't just leave it at that.
So I'm not trying to put any intonation in this, but the discussion centered around that White House counsel and others, other lawyers thought that this could be a closed door discussion between DOJ and NARA to try to solve the issue without making it a big deal.
As I remember, you know, given the fact that obviously the president's counsel had volunteered that these documents had been found, they had not been found by anyone else, and that they were raising this proactively, and given the way these things have been handled in the past, at least this is my memory of this, they felt there was a possibility of just handling this internally with them.
And eventually, Special Counsel Her was appointed by Attorney General Garland to investigate the matter and whether or not the president knew he had the classified documents, where they were stored, that kind of thing. Were you interviewed by Special Counsel Her?
I was not.
It was also reported that the Special Counsel gave the White House a draft copy of the report for review prior to issuance. Did you review the draft?
No, I did not.
Do you know who did review the draft?
I believe the White House counsel's office, but again, I can't speak authoritatively to that.
Did the White House counsel's office bring you any concerns regarding the draft?
The White House counsel's office did not discuss the substance of the draft with me after they had reviewed it.
There were a number of letters back and forth between the special counsel and the White House counsel and the president's personal attorney, particularly around the statement that Peter read that he was a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Were you involved at all in any of the drafting of those letters?
No, I was not.
Obviously, the final report included that language. Were you involved in the public response from the White House to the report?
Yes, I was.
What was your involvement?
We had an initial discussion, as I remember, around whether there should be a written statement or whether the president should address it directly. And I was involved in that discussion.
And on which side of the fence did you land?
I don't remember where I was initially. The president made the decision that he wanted to address it directly.
The president then gave a press conference afterwards. Were you involved in preparing him for that press conference?
Yes, as I remember, he gave the press conference after he had returned from addressing the House Democratic retreat. And there was not a lot of time to prepare him. So that is what I remember from that.
All right. It was reported that after the report came out that, using the White House colloquially, that they were upset with DOJ for allowing the release of this report and that it violated special counsel regulations and that the language was inflammatory and all this stuff. Do you recall any of those conversations?
I think our counsel and I think our lawyers were very angry about that, as I remember, yes.
Were there any conversations regarding firing Merrick Garland?
I certainly was not part of any discussions about firing the Attorney General.
And then one final one, before this discovery of the documents in November 2022, did anyone ever raise the possibility of classified documents at the Penn Biden Center to you?
Boy, I don't remember anyone raising that. No.
Thank you.
And I initially brought up her report with regard to what factors were considered when deciding to hold the 2024 presidential debate much earlier than normal, I think earlier than had ever been done. And just so the record is clear, did cognition on the part of President Biden play any role in holding the debate earlier?
And for the record, as I remember it, we felt that her had made the age issue front and center, although the president then had a State of the Union where he performed extremely well. And that the impetus behind doing the debate early and doing the debate, you know, in June rather than waiting till September was a political decision on the part of senior advisors. It was a recommendation to the president based on what we were seeing in terms of the overall political situation.
I understand that. To me, that still just sounds like a euphemism, though. I understand that there were concerns about President Biden's age, and I understand that Special Counsel Hur raised concerns about his age. But were there not also concerns about his memory or cognition? And did Special Counsel Hur not also raise concerns about President Biden's memory?
So you're combining the word memory and cognition. The Her quote doesn't combine those. So you're conflating them a lot, and I think maybe that's part of the confusion that you're creating.
Okay. Did President Biden's memory or difficulties with memory play any role in the decision to hold the debate earlier?
You know, as I remember, we didn't have discussions around memory or in the context of the debate, or really didn't discuss memory. I've said this before, age was an issue. You know, he had aged while he was in the White House. He looked older. It happens to every president. And I worked for a young president, and I worked for an older president, and it happened to both of them. And that was really the concern that voters had.
So you don't think voters were concerned that President Biden's memory, for instance, had declined?
No, I cannot speak again for the American voters out there, but the concerns that we heard and that we were really addressing with the early debate were around his age.
I'm paraphrasing a little bit something that happened a couple hours ago. I think you said that after the debate with President Biden being more public-facing, one of the goals was that you work to address concerns about his ability to be president. Did I scribble that down correctly?
You know, I don't remember exactly what I said, but it certainly was to go out there and demonstrate that he was president, that he was energetic, that he was looking forward to the next 4 years, to show the voters Joe Biden.
Those same concerns didn't exist prior to the debate.
The debate was part of addressing those concerns, to make it a two-person race and for people to hear directly from Joe Biden. I think I did say earlier that we always felt our best answer to concerns people raised about his age was for people to see Joe Biden directly.
So we can get a little bit more into how the debate prep itself, I think specifically at Camp David, how that went. And you said already, but you were at Camp David for the debate prep with President Biden for the 2024 debate, is that correct?
Yes, as I remember, I arrived Sunday afternoon and the debate was on Thursday.
Do you recall who else was there when you arrived or arrived with you?
As I remember, Bruce and Ron were already there. I seem to remember that Mike had a wedding to attend, so he had left but was coming back that Sunday. I do not remember who else was already there.
Mike Donnellan, is that?
Yes, I'm sorry, Mike Donnellan. I think Steve, I do remember arriving on Sunday. Jeff Zients arrived on Sunday. I think most people arrived on Sunday, and it had just been very small group.
When did President Biden arrive?
I don't remember exactly, but he had arrived the previous week.
So he was already,
Sometime in that week, he was already there.
when you arrived at Camp David, what was your impression of President Biden's condition? Did he seem tired or sick or anything of that nature?
As I remember, I didn't see President Biden on Sunday when I arrived. We didn't do anything Sunday night. On Monday, we had an initial kind of mock debate Monday afternoon where, you know, I thought he seemed in pretty good shape, but he was developing a cold at the time. And then we had the larger mock debate on Monday as well.
So you thought he was all right, but was maybe just coming down with a cold?
He was starting to come down with a cold, it was clear.
And what made that clear?
Cold symptoms. Okay, as I remember, he was sneezing, was blowing his nose, kind of the classic cold symptoms.
Do you have any knowledge of President Biden being given Ambien during this time?
I have no knowledge of that, no.
Do you have any knowledge of President Biden being given or taking Ambien at any time?
I have no knowledge of that, no.
Hunter Biden recently said in an interview something to that effect. Do you doubt that assertion, or?
No,
you
I just have no knowledge of this.
Is it true that President Biden took up several naps during the first day of debate prep?
I don't know. I was not, I saw him at the small mock. I saw him at the larger mock. We went through Q&A after both of them. I don't know what he was doing before I saw him.
And we've talked about this in a few different spots here, but just for clarity, what exactly was your role in debate prep?
My role was to play in the mock debates, the CNN moderator, Dana Bash.
And besides playing a character during the mock debate, did you play any other role in debate prep?
Well, after we did the mock debates, we would go through Q&A with the president, talk to him. Those conversations were led by Ron Klain, but all of us participated.
Mr. Klain told us, and I'm paraphrasing, but that essentially when he arrived, he was concerned that President Biden had not reviewed the materials, the relevant materials for the debate prep. And that was clear because he had not made his usual slash marks and other annotations on the cards. Did you notice that yourself?
No, I don't remember seeing his debate. I don't remember seeing the president's materials this time. So I didn't see his personal notebook. I would say that was not the first time I had heard that. I didn't hear Ron complain about it this time, but that was not an unusual complaint at the beginning of debate prep, so.
It was not an unusual complaint.
Like in 2019 and 2020.
So similar concerns arose where advisors noticed that there were no annotations or markings on the preparation, which indicated to them that President Biden, or at that point, candidate Biden, had not reviewed the materials. Is that fair?
At the beginning of prep, there were times, but I would also say that I was not there in 2024, meeting with him in small group as I had been in the past.
What was your impression of President Biden's level of preparedness at the early stages of debate prep in 2024?
So as I remember, I actually thought he was in better shape than I had expected on that Monday in those mock debates. Presidential incumbents tend to do very poorly in their first debate. That's kind of a historical debate thing that happens, and I've obviously been involved in the 2012 Obama debates.
So he was better than expected in what way?
In the sense of having a good sense, having a sense of how he wanted to go prosecute his arguments. I thought that he was, as I remember, I thought that he was in a pretty good space about how he wanted to set up some of the contrast.
And you expected him to be worse than that?
I wasn't really sure what to expect. He'd had a grueling June schedule that included 2 European trips and had not had that much time to review his preparation materials, it's true.
So I think the way I asked it was when, at the beginning of debate prep,
Yeah.
but over the course of debate prep, did concerns arise for you about President Biden's level of preparedness or his performance?
As I remember, the concerns that arose for me in the course of debate prep that week were very much around the cold, its effect on his voice, and the fact that it seemed to be getting worse. That if on Monday he had cold symptoms, by Tuesday he had a cold, by Wednesday he had a bad cold, and the progression concerned me because I did have concerns around how it might affect his performance.
Were there any conversations about potentially delaying the debate?
None that I was part of.
Were you part of any discussions with other people at Camp David, other advisors at Camp David who had concerns about President Biden's health at that point?
As I remember, we were all concerned, about his voice and how his voice was going to sound and how, just in general, his, the cold and how he was going to feel by Thursday.
Did anyone else raise different concerns? Did anyone raise concerns about President Biden's mastery of the issues or understanding of what had been said on the campaign trail or by President Trump or anything outside of his voice and seeming sick?
I don't remember having those conversations specifically. The president, as I remember, the president was in pretty good shape on the arguments that Donald Trump was making against him. But again, that is my memory of it.
So you wouldn't say his voice was hard to hear, that his delivery was halting, or that his answers were all over the place during debate prep?
Those are 3 different
Those
questions.
are 3
You wanna
different
separate
questions. I will go to the first one.
I can ask you again. if
Yeah.
you'd like. Did President Biden's performance range from bad to passable?
That's a difficult question because there are some people who in prep are never going to be that great, but they're what we like to call game day players, and you put them out there and they perform. I think that is a phrase that comes from some sport, but I forget which one. And I think we had always regarded him, I certainly had regarded President Biden as a game day player. So.
Was his voice hard to hear?
His voice, as I remember, his voice was not hard to hear in the mock because he was projecting. And in the Q&A afterwards, his voice was soft, but he was also losing his voice because of the cold. In the mock debates, though, you could hear him and you could hear him clearly.
Was his delivery halting?
Again, as I remember, his delivery in the mock debates was fine. He did a pretty good job, but his voice was going.
And again, during the mock debate, were his answers all over the place in your view?
I don't remember thinking his answers were all over the place. I certainly remember thinking that he needed to tighten up answers, that, he wasn't following all of the talking points we had given him, but that is not unique to 2024. That is simply Joe Biden, so.
And we're getting close to the end of our hour here, so I think this will be my last question, but.
Okay.
Were these debate prep sessions, mock sessions, were they called off early?
As I remember, we did shorten the mock part of it, on Tuesday and on Wednesday, because we wanted to save his voice. We didn't want to have him standing there for 90 minutes and using his voice that much.
So the mocks, multiple of them were cut short and the concern was to save his voice?
Yes, that is what I remember.
Okay.
Were any members of the president's family at debate prep?
Not that I remember. Dr. Biden was not there. No, I don't remember anybody.
No, Hunter Biden.
No. I'm sitting here thinking, was there a grandchild who came by at some point? But I do not believe that is the case. But I could be wrong, so, yeah.
Time is 1:26. Ms. Dunn, in the prior hour, you discussed with my Republican colleagues discussions around decisions to issue pardons and clemency and take other executive action. Again, just so the record is very clear, to your knowledge, did anyone in the White House at any point during Joe Biden's presidency ever make decisions to issue any form of clemency, or pardons in Joe Biden's name without his knowledge or authorization?
And to my knowledge, that did not happen.
Did you ever make decisions to issue pardons or clemency on behalf of Joe Biden?
I did not.
That was the president's decision, is that right?
The president made those decisions, staff made recommendations.
Great. And at any point during the Biden presidency, did anyone in the White House, to your knowledge, ever issue any other type of executive order or take executive action without President Biden's knowledge or authorization?
I mean, to my knowledge, no executive orders were issued without the president having reviewed and made a decision on them. And other executive actions as well.
Now, apart from any instances in which President Biden may have delegated authority to Vice President Harris to undergo a medical procedure,
Yes.
did anyone, to your knowledge, ever step in to carry out the duties of the presidency in Joe Biden's place because he was unable to do so?
Oh, to my knowledge, no.
In the prior hour, you also touched a bit on debate prep. Did anything about debate prep change your understanding that Joe Biden was able to execute the duties as President of the United States?
In the course of debate prep, nothing that happened raised issues for me about the president's ability to execute his duties as President of the United States.
Thank you. Move off the record.
We've concluded our last hour talking about debate prep. I just want to take one step back from that. When did you first understand that President Biden would run for a second term?
As I remember, after the midterms in 2022, he told, I'm sorry, let me start. What I remember is that he told his senior advisors after the midterm of 2022 that we should assume he was running unless he told us differently, and that we should start putting together a plan for the re-election campaign.
So, and again, I don't want to mischaracterize what you said, so please feel free to re-clarify, but you stated in regards to your coming back to the White House after being a federal government employee, you came back in 2022, and I think one of the reasons that you said you came back was to help prepare a strategy or otherwise help the president in with the prospect of re-election. Did you not know at that point that he planned to, or were you assuming?
As I remember, I, like most other people, in the senior ranks of that administration, assumed the president would run for re-election. He'd had an extraordinarily successful first 2 years, and clearly felt good about the job he was doing, but also that he had not finished yet.
So, in March of 2020, President Biden said something along the lines of that he saw himself as a bridge to a new generation of leaders. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it was something along those lines. Do you remember that?
I'm familiar with that, Michigan, if I'm not mistaken.
Did you not see that as President Biden indicating, or then candidate Biden indicating that he intended to only serve one term?
As I remember, that was not how I interpreted it. In the course of a 2-year campaign, he said something to that effect once, as I remember. And presidents generally serve 8 years when they can get reelected.
Do you think that was the American people's perception of those comments?
Again, I can't really read the minds of the American people here. So.
Did you have concerns about President Biden running for re-election?
I thought, as I remember, I thought that he had been a very effective president who had gotten a lot of things done. And that to the extent that I would have concerns, they would be around how tough politically that re-election would be.
Did you say to other White House officials that, are we sure this is a good idea? Something to that effect?
As I remember, there were conversations between the senior advisors and some of the political advisors, off and on throughout 2023, testing the proposition. But the president had been clear with us that we were supposed to prepare for re-election, and that is what we did.
Were you worried that he would be embarrassed?
I don't recall exactly, but certainly I didn't want him to lose.
Was there, inside of the White House, was there ever any consideration of whether President Biden would be physically capable of running for and serving a second term?
No, I don't remember there was concern around whether he physically was capable of serving a second term or running for a second term.
And to avoid compound questions, I'll just ask you that same one again about whether there were conversations within the White House of whether President Biden was mentally capable of running for and serving a second term.
No. In my observation, President Biden was serving as president every day, the most difficult job in the world, making decisions, making very tough decisions, under enormous levels of stress, and doing a very good job. And I think that we felt, that many of us felt, that answered that question.
So then there weren't conversations or discussions about whether he would be mentally capable of running for and serving a second term?
I don't remember any conversations along those lines.
Were you aware of any staffers that were concerned about President Biden's mental ability to run for or serve a second term?
I was not aware of staffers feeling that way.
Okay, we'll go back to the debate now. So we finished up talking about debate prep at Camp David. On debate night, did you attend the debate?
I did not attend the debate.
Where did you Did you watch the debate
I did watch the debate from my home,
from your home on television?
actually on my computer with dial groups.
Could you explain, just for the record, what a dial group is?
As dial groups are groups of voters who are brought in to watch speeches, debates, other things, and they're instructed to turn the dial to the right if they feel positive, to the left if they feel more negative, and it allows you to track in real time sort of emotions and what is working, what's not working.
Did you watch it alone or with
No,
someone?
I was with my family.
President Biden did not perform well in that debate. Would you agree with that?
I was watching it on the dial groups, and I've said, and I believe, he didn't have a great night, he had a bad night, that the beginning of the debate was weaker than the end of the debate. But I have to say, as someone who was watching it on the dial groups, neither candidate did particularly well.
You said it was a bad night. So what about it made it a bad night?
The beginning of the debate, I thought his voice sounded soft. I thought, his answers weren't particularly sharp or good. Clearly, I think people know what made that a bad night. So.
Had you seen that version of President Biden, what you're describing, his answers looked like, and the way he sounded, had you seen that during debate prep?
We had not seen it during debate prep, and I was surprised to see it on the debate stage.
Had you ever seen President Biden like that in any other instance?
I cannot remember another instance where he was like the beginning, the first 10 to 15 minutes of that debate.
It seemed that President Biden would freeze up or lose his train of thought during some of his answers during the debate. Is that fair?
No, the president didn't have a good debate. His answers weren't sharp. They sounded wandering, especially at the beginning. I think that he didn't do what he'd set out to accomplish in terms of reassuring the American people about his ability to serve the next 4 years. And, so whatever specific you want to raise, I think I will generally say that the beginning of that debate was very harmful politically to his candidacy.
So you said it didn't do a good job of reassuring the American people that he was fit to serve another 4 years.
Yeah.
So reassuring, so do you believe the American people were concerned that he was unfit to serve for 4 more years?
No, as I think I've said before, we had seen that age and his age was really the primary issue for so many voters about whether or not they were going to vote for him for re-election. Part of what we wanted to do with that debate was to show them a Joe Biden who was gearing to go for the next 4 years.
So, and forgive me, but we keep coming back to this sort of point here, but the debate, doing it the way it was done, to dispel concerns of President Biden's age, the debate, nothing about it would make him actually younger, of course. So what about it, how would it have dispelled concerns about President Biden's age?
As I think I said earlier, we had seen that the best way to address concerns around age was for people to see Joe Biden, to see him out there, to see him making the State of the Union speech, going back and forth with members who were heckling him, to see him on the campaign trail. So again, it was people hearing for themselves as opposed to what was coming on their social media networks.
So did you think it would be beneficial politically for President Biden to demonstrate that he was energetic?
We thought it would be beneficial for the American people to get to see Joe Biden directly without any filter. That is why we recommended the debate. along with wanting to make it, to define the race more as a two-person race.
And this was, again, to help dispel or alleviate concerns about President Biden's age.
This was to reassure people and to communicate to people, as I remember, that, you know, his age wasn't going to keep him from being a great president in the second term.
What about someone's age would make them unable to serve a second term?
Well, I don't think there was at least as I remember, there was nothing about his age or his physical shape that would have made him unable to serve a second term. He'd had clean bills of health. His doctor had written he was, you know, fit to be president, to serve as president. Those of us who had regular interactions with him saw him as someone who was doing the role of president and continuing to do so. So there are people who have concerns just about age in general in this society. We felt hearing from Joe Biden would help to set those minds at ease.
People have concerns about age in general, meaning, what do you mean by that?
Well, there are, and you're young, but as you get a little older, you will discover that people associate age with certain qualities, maybe not as energetic, maybe not, you know, not someone that you want to give jobs to. I think it's pretty well documented in this country. The president was extraordinary for a person his age or a person even younger than him in terms of what he accomplished. And that is what we wanted to go out there and show the American people.
And you felt that he did not do a good job of showing that?
There's no question that debate did not help our case.
You said that President Biden had a good State of the Union address a couple months prior to the debate.
Mm-hmm.
And after the State of the Union, were there dial groups on the State of the Union as well?
I'm sorry, doubters in what sense?
Dial groups.
Oh, dial
watching
groups?
Dials.
Yes, we had done dial groups.
Was prior to the State of the Union, were there still concerns amongst the voters about the president's ability to serve another 4 years?
You know, the concerns that we saw with voters, as I remember, best of my recollection, were more just to do with his actual age, hearing about how old he was, in the sense, you know, that you know, he was the oldest president ever, which was certainly widely reported on a very consistent basis.
You said about the debate that you wanted to reassure people about his ability to serve another 4 years. Is that strictly just speaking about age?
Yes, that is, as I remember, that is very much about age and the fact that he wanted to show people he really had the energy and that he had, you know, the desire to go do this job for another 4 years.
And you listed a couple perceived negatives about age, including one that not someone you want to give a job to. Is loss of memory a problem with age?
You know, I'm not an expert on aging, unfortunately about to become one probably. But you know, I think that younger people have memory problems as well. I think we've all met people who have memory problems, so.
Is making faster decisions more difficult with age?
I might question the idea that a faster decision is always a better decision. I think that, and certainly when it comes to being president, snap decisions are not necessarily what people are looking for. They're looking for the right decision.
Is it more common amongst elderly people to have other kind of like mental acuity issues?
I think we're just having like a really strange conversation about
I just don't know what age means.
what age means in what context.
Well, having the debate earlier to reassure people about his ability to serve for 4 years because of his
I think
age.
she's answered this question approximately 25 times. So I think, why don't you just explain for them one more time what you were thinking, which is all she can do, when she made the recommendation to have him do the early debate.
Okay. So the president was, as was widely reported, the oldest president to serve in the history of the United States. This had become part of how people saw him. We felt that doing the early debate would accomplish two things. One is it would start forcing the choice between Biden and Trump as opposed to making the race a referendum just on Joe Biden. The second was, given the fact that people widely knew him as being the oldest president ever to serve, that it would be a way of demonstrating to the American people that he was ready for the next 4 years.
And I won't ask it again, having the debate earlier doesn't change the number. The concern about age has nothing to do with the number. It has to do with what age represents, which is what we just walked through. And as you testified, not someone you want to give a job to. So
Well, that is sometimes the case, but I'll just say one more time that there were two reasons to do that debate. They were both important reasons for us politically. The president agreed to do the debate. We had had a State of the Union address where we had seen both our fundraising, his numbers, and grassroots enthusiasm really spike up after that event. And we were looking for similar events that we could organize around where people could get excited about Joe Biden.
if you saw it, in the polling after the State of the Union, did voters' concerns about his age dwindle?
They did not. I think I've said already that it was not a successful debate.
No. I'm sorry if I misspoke. The State of the Union.
Oh, the State of the
Polls
Union?
or dial groups after-
Okay, so that's an interesting question, certainly in our research. We did see that the State of the Union had helped address some of those voter concerns.
How so?
We just saw in our research that people moved towards Joe Biden again.
But did the research say that part of their concerns regarding age were lessened?
You know what, I don't remember the exact things, and unfortunately, you've already had our pollster in here, so. But I will just tell you that I do remember that the numbers, especially with some key groups, definitely moved more towards Biden or an openness towards supporting Biden, which at that point is what you're trying to accomplish.
And then I'll kick it back. You think that was because he was energetic that night?
I think it's because he had a very good State of the Union that night.
You think it's because he showed that he could spar on his feet that night?
I think that was part of it. I think that his overall message was an important part of it as well.
Do you think his command of the facts was important that night?
In my experience, voters are more interested in where you're going to take them and how they're going to get there than they are on, the minutia of legislative bills. I'm sure your bosses would agree with me. So
And then do you think his ability to project was important that night?
I thought, as I think I've said before, that his voice and having a strong voice was really critical for his public appearances.
I think you said earlier that you had never seen President Biden conduct himself the way he did during the debate prior to that. Is that accurate?
I think that what I said was that as far as I can remember, I hadn't seen that 10 to 15 minute stretch at the beginning, had not actually seen that replicated.
George Clooney, in a 2024 op-ed, wrote that when he had seen the president about 3 weeks before, he, quote, he was the same man we all witnessed at the debate. So it sounds like Mr. Clooney had seen President Biden act similarly, but you never did?
I can't judge what George Clooney saw. I can only say what I saw.
Were you at that fundraiser where,
No, I was not there.
at the fundraiser with Mr. Clooney?
No, I was not at the Clooney fundraiser.
So do you think President Biden's age had anything to do with his bad night at the debate?
I'm not sure what caused his bad night at the debate. I believe that, he was ill, he had a bad cold, he had gotten progressively worse in the course of the week, and that he went on that stage not feeling well, and, he had a bad night, but I honestly cannot tell you why.
I think you've said that that the dial groups didn't react strongly to President Biden's debate performance. Do you not think that the American people were more, I can start again. Do you think that the American people were more concerned about President Biden's age after the debate?
No, I think coming out of the debate, and a debate that, at least in our dial groups, neither candidate did particularly well. The attention, and certainly the press attention in the political world, focused very much on the president's performance and his weak performance, and that we saw over the days coming out of it, as I remember, that we started to see a little deterioration, although the bottom did not drop out.
I mentioned it earlier, but this was a CBS and YouGov survey conducted after the debate that found that 72% of voters do not believe Biden has the mental or cognitive health to serve as president, as well as nearly half of his own party. That's up 7 points from the beginning of June. Were you not hearing that sort of information at this time?
You're asking whether she was aware of that poll at this time?
Were you aware of that poll at the time?
No, as I remember, to the best of my recollection, we were seeing so many polls. I'm sure I probably did see that poll, but all of the polls, the public polling in particular, was pretty negative at that point.
I guess I'll be more specific. The poll, and again, not to have this age versus the things that come with age argument, but I think it's important. The poll is not about his age specifically. It's about his mental or cognitive health to serve as president. So at least according to that poll, a significant majority of the American people were concerned that President Biden did not have the mental or cognitive health to serve as president. So during that time, did you know that the American people were concerned that President Biden did not have the mental or cognitive health to serve?
No, as I recall, the polling across the board was pretty negative when it came to this. It's one of the reasons why we adopted a strategy to try to get the president out there as much as possible coming out of that. And of course, we had a NATO summit coming up, which was poor timing, but nothing we can do about NATO. So, we knew that people needed to see him and hear him even more coming out of that debate.
I'm not sure if that answered my question. Were you aware that the American people had concerns about President Biden's mental or cognitive health around the debate?
And I think I answered that by saying that we were aware what the polling said. Absolutely. And that's why we adopted a strategy to make sure they could hear more from Joe Biden, see more from Joe Biden, that we were going to do more interviews, that he was going to be out there as much as we could get him out there.
And was President Biden aware of these concerns?
I can't say specifically that he saw any individual poll you may ask me about, but certainly his senior advisors talked to him about what the political situation was coming out of the debate. He also got a lot of information from other people as well.
Did you think there was a difference between how the voters viewed the debate and how the political elite class viewed the debate?
I thought that, as I remember, I thought that the political elite class was, kind of overreacting in terms of the rush to say that you had to replace someone who had won the nomination with millions of votes, who'd been chosen by voters, who'd been chosen by his political party, and was the president of the United States and a very successful president.
so what happened over the next 5 to 10 days with Leader Jeffries and Speaker Pelosi and George Clooney and all the donors, I mean, was an overreaction to the debate in your opinion?
I'm not going to label that was an overreaction, because, you know, some of those people, certainly Leader Jeffries, Speaker Emeritus, Pelosi, people like that have a responsibility to their members, and they were reacting to what their members were saying. But it was the real question was, can Joe Biden still win this race? And that was what, as I remember, we set out to demonstrate that he could still do, so.
You said in a Political Playbook podcast, it was published August 9th, but I think you recorded it the day after you left the White House. Do you recall?
I recall recording it, yeah.
During that interview, you said that after the debate was, quote, 24 days of unremitting, negative, horrible attacks on Joe Biden. Then he started moving from his own party and then from the press. So did you believe the press reporting on President Biden's performance of the debate was horrible?
Can we see that one?
It's a podcast. I can.
There's a transcript of that podcast.
Can we go off the record for 1 second? What was your opinion of the press's coverage, the reporting of President Biden's performance during the debate?
I thought the press was exceedingly rough on Biden, although not surprising, because I think that there were many reporters who covered him who were, well, I don't think you want to go into a huge, my analysis of the Washington press corps, but, and our challenges with them. But I did think that it was one-sided, that there was very little scrutiny given to things that Donald Trump had said, things that he had said in the course of the debate. There was almost no coverage of Trump during this period, up until, of course, July 19th. And that it was very one-sided, and exactly, unfortunately, what we had set out to try to change, which was change it from a referendum to a choice, so.
Do you want some tea or anything?
No, I think I'm good. Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
And I won't ask you specifically about the quote, but I think it's important. I'll read it to you just so you have context. You said that after the debate, people started getting that feedback for Biden to drop out. People started getting that feedback within 48 hours. Were you aware that people at the White House were getting feedback in general for the president to drop out?
As I remember, I was aware, yes. We discussed it.
Were you getting outreach directly from people on that topic?
Yes, I was getting outreach from people who were concerned and wanted him to drop out. I was getting outreach from people who wanted to know what our plan was to move forward. So I was getting outreach along a variety of issues.
And limiting this to the 48 hours after the debate, there were people reaching out saying that President Biden should drop out during that time?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize, I just misspoke then, because I would say in the 48 hours after the debate, I didn't get many of those incoming calls. I think people were still trying to digest what had happened.
And then after the 48 hours, you started receiving some outreach saying that President Biden should drop out?
As well as outreach saying, what is your plan for staying in? How are we going to go win this thing?
Who, if you can recall, were advocating for the president to drop out?
I can't recall anybody specifically. I know all of us were getting many calls from people across a wide spectrum of issues.
Immediately after the debate, the president, I think, went to 2 post-debate parties.
He did.
Spoke on stage. And then went to like Waffle House or something and then went to Raleigh, North Carolina. Does that match your recollection?
Yes, as I remember, he went to a post-debate party. He did the Waffle House in Atlanta, I'm pretty, again, my memory may not be 100%, but I'm pretty sure he did the Waffle House. Then he went to Raleigh for a rally.
As someone from the South, you can really only go to Waffle House after midnight, so it makes sense.
Well, I think it was after
I
midnight,
think
actually.
it was too. And then he had a little while without very many public-facing events, and then the NATO summit. Is that?
Okay, so unfortunately, I can't fill in many of those blanks, but he did have 3 fundraisers the following day after the after the debate. And then he went to Camp David. And he came back from Camp David, as best I recall, Monday, and made a public statement from the White House that evening on the Supreme Court's immunity decision.
Do you recall why he went to Camp David that weekend?
To the best of my recollection, I think there was some family event that had been planned.
A photo shoot with Vogue.
Yeah, I just don't remember.
Do you remember any discussions about canceling that trip to Camp David?
I was not part of any discussions on canceling it.
And to be clear, after the debate, you still thought that the campaign was recoverable for President Biden?
I am not a person who believes that elections are decided in June. I believe they're decided in November. We had some big events ahead of us that I thought we had to take into account as we thought about moving forward. We had a convention. We had a second debate in September that, had the president stayed in, I think would have had a world record number of people watching it. So anyway, so I was not prepared immediately after the debate to say that the campaign was ended.
And you thought you had no concerns about President Biden's fitness to serve another 4 years after the debate?
I dealt with Joe Biden as president, nearly 3.5 years, take a few months out for when I was gone. I watched him make hard decisions. I watched him make easy decisions. I watched him do some incredibly difficult things. And I did not have concerns around his cognitive ability to do the job as president.
And you still didn't have those concerns after the debate?
I did not have those concerns.
Do you think that the American people's concerns about President Biden's cognitive or physical fitness were legitimate?
Well, the American people have a right to make their own decisions, but the American people also have a right to change their minds, to get more information, and that's what campaigns are about. So what we were concentrating on was how do we put together a campaign coming out of this that can still win.
On July 8th, the president issued a letter saying that he was staying in the race, similar to what you've been saying, he won
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
so many delegates, so many votes, that kind of thing. That one series. Were you involved in the drafting of that letter?
I was not.
Were you involved in the press or communications aspect of that letter?
Yes, I was.
What did that involvement look like?
Pardon?
What did that involvement look like?
The press and communications around it. I don't recall specifics. The decision that, it was drafted and presented really as something that the president had already signed off on. And then we were just going to figure out what to do with it in the press, but I don't recall exactly what tactics we used.
Do you recall whose idea the letter was? Like why he needed to stake such a hard claim at that moment?
As I recall, we had been having, as part of our senior advisor discussions, the need to kind of shut this down, to take away the discussion about whether he would drop out. So I do not know whose idea the letter was, I just know that it was very much in the vein of what we'd been talking about in terms of next steps.
And then, I'm not gonna read the quote because I didn't print off the transcript, but on July 10th, Speaker Emeritus Pelosi said, in essence, it's up to the president to decide whether or not he's going to run. Do you recall that?
I do remember that.
That was 2 days after the president said he's absolutely going to run.
I do remember that.
Did the speaker give you, or are you aware if she gave anyone else a heads up about this comment?
I did not get a heads up from her. I am unaware if she gave anyone else, but she may have.
What was the White House's reaction to that interview?
No. No, I can only speak to my own reaction here, which was obviously she was reopening a door that we were trying to close. It was, clear that this was an additional political problem.
To your awareness, was the president aware of the speaker's comments?
Well, he was certainly aware of them after she made them. I do not know if he had prior knowledge.
What was his reaction after the fact?
No, I don't remember talking to him directly.
Do you remember getting a readout of his reaction from any of the other senior staff?
I don't remember getting a readout. I was not as involved at that point in some of the discussions, so.
And then on July 11th, I believe you went to a meeting of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, is that correct?
I do not remember attending that meeting.
Okay, was that just Mr. Ricchetti, Mr. Donlin,
And Jen O'Malley Dillon,
Jen O'Malley
yes.
Dillon? Okay. Did you get a readout from that meeting?
As I remember, I got a very brief readout that it was just very tough, so.
There wasn't a whole lot of support?
There was not a
in
whole
the
lot of
Senate.
support. Mhm.
Do you recall if that readout was presented to the president?
I do not know if it was. I would, again, I was not in all the meetings at that point.
Were you surprised that the president had little support in the Senate at that point?
No, as I remember, it was at a very, it was at a fairly low point, and the senators, and the senators weren't coming out publicly, but they were still communicating privately. So, I guess I was not surprised that senators were worried.
Because there had been private communications from the senators, or why?
Why was I not surprised?
Yes.
I think there had certainly been some individual communications into the senior advisor team, primarily to Steve Ricchetti, because he dealt more with congressional relations, and he did report them out.
In your view, who were the people, I'll ask a different question.
Yeah.
Was anyone in the campaign or in the White House advocating for President Biden to drop out at this point?
To my knowledge, and as far as I could tell, there was no one within the senior ranks of the campaign or the White House who were advocating this at this point. I cannot speak to the junior ranks of the campaign. I wasn't there. I wasn't in Wilmington.
And at what point are we talking about?
Up until, let's say, July 11th at this point.
I thought we were at July 11th, as you make me relive just a really fun period here, day by day.
So up until July 11th, you were not aware of any senior campaign officials or White House staff that thought that President Biden should drop out of the race, is that right?
I was not aware of any.
And at some point, did one of those people say that they believe President Biden should drop out after July 11th, but prior to President Biden dropping out?
Say it to Ms. Dunn.
Did you have any conversations with anyone on the campaign or in the White House where someone said President Biden should drop out of the race prior to him dropping out of the race?
No, I do not remember having any conversations with anyone in the senior ranks about should the president drop out, who said to me that they thought the president should drop out. The conversations were very much, how do we try to get through this?
What about conversations with the campaign's internal pollsters? Did they ever communicate to you that there was a narrow or zero path to victory?
I believe, as I remember, we were getting our battleground data out of the field and had, as I remember, to the best of my recollection, it was a Zoom meeting. That it was not an in-person meeting where they presented the battleground data and presented a very grim picture of that data.
Do you recall the electoral count on?
I do not recall it. I don't remember.
And this is, again, in reference to the playbook podcast I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
and I'll ask you a specific question to get at it without asking you about the quote itself. You said you had this decision that the Democratic Party made to ignore their primary voters and ignore their primary process. This was a very donor-driven thing. Do you think that the Democratic Party, in their push to have President Biden withdraw from the race, were ignoring primary voters and the primary process?
As I recall, we all had strong feelings about the fact that there had been a primary process, that the only primary candidate, elected official who had run against the president had run a campaign very specifically focused on his age in the state of New Hampshire, had spent a significant amount of money up there, and that the president, who was not even on the ballot, had won as a write-in candidate there with 71% of the vote, despite a campaign based on his age, and that the president had gone through a primary process in which millions of people had voted for him to be the nominee. So we were concerned about that and the message it sent.
And you also said that this was a very donor-driven thing. Do you think that the Democratic Party, their push to have President Biden step aside in the 2024 race, that was a donor-driven thing?
I've had a chance to have some perspective since August 8th. And, as I look at it in retrospect, it was not just donors, it was also Democratic voters, it was Democratic elected officials. Their basic concern, though, going to what this committee is looking at, was not whether or not the president could do the job. It was very much whether the president could win, and what Democrats saw as an existential threat in the part of the Republican nominee.
What had changed that they thought that he couldn't win?
They felt that his debate performance was so bad, and they had concerns around whether his second debate performance would be any better. And just the concerns that they had around Joe Biden had crystallized. It was an unfortunate thing for the president.
I guess I'm still not clear if the party was worried, of course, that their nominee wouldn't win, and they were worried that voters had not liked what they had seen at the debate. What were the voters concerned about?
This is like a lot of, it's the entire Democratic Party, it's the entire voters. I think she's explained as best she can with this question, which we've kind of repeated a number of times, her views of what she both personally felt and what she thought other people felt in the world of the Democratic Party and Democratic voters. I don't know that there's more that we're gonna get from this.
Were you among the people most fiercely defending President Biden's, defending the idea that President Biden should stay in the race?
As I remember, I was a very vocal proponent for his staying in the race during the post-debate period, and really up until he dropped out.
Who else was among that group?
I think most of the senior advisors. Many of us had been through some really tough times with presidents, with candidates, and felt that, Joe Biden had been a strong president who had really done great things for the American people, and that we wanted to help him fight through to another term.
Did you go to President Biden's Rehoboth Beach House on the weekend of July 20th, the weekend he eventually dropped out of the race?
No, I did not.
When did you learn that President Biden was considering dropping out of the race?
When I was, as I remember, I was summoned to a senior staff call or a senior advisor's call or some kind of call that Sunday. And having a little experience in politics, felt that was probably going to be the message. The president at that point had been diagnosed with COVID and was home and ill. So obviously a strategy of fighting back was becoming more difficult.
So to that point, why did President Biden drop out of the race?
I think he made a statement that is very self-explanatory.
And you have no further knowledge of the reasons that led to President Biden withdrawing from the 2024 race besides what he outlined in his letter?
I'm going to let the president speak for himself on this one.
Do you have any knowledge of the factors that led President Biden to drop out of the race besides what was in his letter?
I don't have any knowledge of any other factors.
Was your husband Robert Bauer, in Rehoboth that weekend?
What?
You know where he was.
Yeah, I know where he was. He was in Woodstock, New York.
So unrelated to the president's dropping out of the race?
Unrelated.
Were you given any advance notice on the withdrawal?
I was not.
Do you still believe today that if President Biden had stayed in the race, he would have eventually won the 2024 election against Donald Trump?
I have no way of knowing what would have happened in that race, and I don't think any of us do.
At the time of President Biden dropping out of the race, did you still believe that President Biden could win in November?
At the time he dropped out, I believed that he could win. That is different from believing he would win. But I've spent a lifetime in campaigns, and I did believe that there was a path to victory that we would be able to find.
Did you disagree with President Biden's ultimate decision to drop out of the race?
No, I respected his decision. Presidents and candidates get to make the decision to get in, and they get to make the decision to get out.
He didn't ask for your advice about whether to drop out of the race or not?
No, he did not.
If he had, what would you have told him?
No, we're not gonna do a hypothetical if the president had called her. She has answered that she didn't talk to him, he didn't consult with her. She respects his decision. Let's not do hypotheticals.
Regardless of the president's decision, before he dropped out, did you think that it was the right choice for President Biden to drop out of the race?
People get to make their own decisions about whether they're going to be candidates or not. And he made the decision to run, and it was his decision to make. So it was not for me to say if it was right or wrong. So
You are an expert in this area. Would you not say?
In which area?
In
what people getting out of races.
in presidential elections and political elections in general, are you an expert?
No, I wouldn't say I was an expert, but I am someone with a great deal of experience. And one thing I've learned is that the decision to run is the most personal decision. The decision to get out is an equally personal decision. And that a lot of factors go into it that staff don't know about, and they don't need to know about it, so.
When discussing the events following the debate leading up to the president's ultimate withdrawal, you mentioned a couple times that you were less involved in conversations than previously. At what point did you become less involved?
You know, I really don't recall, but certainly the second half of, by the second half of 2024, I was less involved in some of the discussions than I had been in the past.
Why is that?
You know, I'm not really sure, but I was no longer as involved as I had been. I wasn't included in things.
Thank you.
We can go off the record. All right, we'll go on the record. Ms. Dunn, I believe in the last hour, you said something to the effect of age was a primary issue for voters as to whether to vote for Joe Biden for re-election. Does that sound right?
That sounds pretty accurate.
And to the extent that age was a primary issue, would you agree that that was the voters' perception of Joe Biden?
Perception, I'm sorry, I'm not
Sure,
quite.
of course. So to the extent that voters had views on Joe Biden's age, that was their perception from viewing him on TV and from afar. Is that fair to say?
Yes,
And to be clear, you worked in the Biden White House, is that right?
yes,
On 2 different occasions.
yes,
Is it fair to say during your time at the White House, you worked closely with Joe Biden?
yes,
You saw him frequently?
yes.
Did you agree with, strike that, what were your opinions about Joe Biden's ability to serve as president and carry out the duties?
I thought the president made the decisions that only a president can make. I thought that he set the direction and tone for his administration, that he held, you know, his cabinet and his staff accountable, and that he was fully capable of acting as president. And indeed, he did so every day.
And did the polling in any way change your perception or opinion of what you just said?
No, the polling did not change my perception of the president.
Ms. Dunn, was age a factor in the 2020 election of Joe Biden?
Yes,
Was it also a factor for Donald Trump in the 2020 election?
not as much for Trump as it was for Biden.
Fair enough, but it was still a factor.
Yes,
that
it
voters
was.
considered. And same for 2024. Was age a factor in whether voters wanted to elect Donald Trump in your view of the polling? In 2024, excuse me.
In 2024, again, less of an issue for Trump than for Biden,
But an issue nonetheless.
but an issue.
Ms. Dunn, there have been allegations that broadly senior staff covered up Joe Biden's mental acuity during the 2024 campaign. Do you agree there was a cover-up in any respect?
I do not agree.
We'll leave it there. We'll go off the record. Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Dunn, during your conversation with the minority just now, you said that, to paraphrase you, age was not as much of an issue for Trump as it was for Biden. Why do you think age had become an issue more for President Biden than it had for Trump?
Do you mean in the polls?
In the poll, sure, in the polls.
In the polling, each candidate has their own strengths and weaknesses. Age was a significant issue for Biden. Trump had very other issues. Okay, so that while age was a concern, there were other concerns about him that were far more, were stronger.
Yeah, I understand that,
Yeah.
but in your opinion, why had that become an issue for President Biden and not for President Trump as much?
You know, that's a hard judgment for me to make. I think part of it is the definition of President Trump was so different. The concerns about him were very different, although very strong.
So you have no opinion as to why a narrative formed that concerned President Biden's age?
I'm not sure what you're talking
I'm
about.
not sure what the question is here.
Sure, you have no opinion as to why people were concerned about President Biden's age, but not as much President Trump's age.
I think she's talked ad nauseum about her understanding about people's concerns about President Biden's age. I think the topic of whether or not people were concerned about President Trump's age is definitely not what you guys are investigating here. But if you would like to investigate it, I'm sure somebody else would be more appropriate to do that.
I appreciate that, but I'm asking, I understand that we've talked about age quite a bit today, but I'm asking why you believe, in your opinion, you've worked in this area for quite a while, why that became an issue for President Biden and not for President Trump?
So I'm going to give a short answer to this, okay? There was a very concerted effort to make it an issue about President Biden, going back to the 2019 campaign, significant social media, significant, significant attacks on his age. So I think, and part of a media ecosystem in parts of the media that was very dedicated to it. So I think that helped because obviously there was an equal amount of focus on President Biden's opponent, but it was around different issues.
Okay, so you think that the public concern, just so I understand you, the public concern about President Biden's age was the cause of that was at its root, the media.
No,
So
that is not what I said.
Okay, please.
Okay? No, I just want to reframe this a little, okay? Which is, as I think we've discussed now since around 10 this morning,
Sure.
okay? President Biden's age was a concern for voters. It was a concern in the 2020 race. It was a concern in the 2024 race, okay? It was, there was no one thing that caused it. And of course, he was the oldest president to ever serve. So I would say at the end of the day, it was many, many things that caused that. There's no one thing I can point to.
Okay.
Okay, so that's really the answer.
And the last question on this, I just want to understand what you said previously about the media. What role was being played then by the media to exacerbate this issue? Or that's my word, not your word.
Right, and I don't want to use your word on
Okay.
that because I don't believe they exacerbated. I do believe that as part of the political campaign in 2019 and 2020, and then an ongoing basis while the president served, that there were parts of his opponent's ecosystem that, in particular, some of the media parts that spent a disproportionate amount of time covering the president's age and perceived issues around that as opposed to other things. That's all.
Okay.
Okay?
One more question. What parts of the media are you talking about? You said media parts, I just want to know.
Well, and I think I just made that clear, but I'll restate it just in case, which was it was parts of the media ecosystem that are aligned with opponents to President Biden. That's what I would say. Okay?
Okay. Thank you. Then I just wanted to, I've been sitting in the back there, and I want to go back maybe a couple hours, but I think you said that in 2024, the idea was to get President Biden out there so people could see him, for people to see Joe Biden directly, is what you said. Do I have that right?
Do you mean in relation to the decision to do the early debate?
Yes.
I think that sounds right.
Was that your was that advice given by you?
As I recall, it was a consensus on the part of senior advisors and the campaign political team that having him out there more was helpful.
And not to be nitpicky, but did you agree with the consensus?
It's a consensus.
But a consensus doesn't mean that there's nobody
Yes,
saying.
I agree.
Okay, thank you. Was that your view throughout your time in the White House, that people should see Joe Biden more?
As I recall, certainly during the campaign and then when he became president, it was definitely my view that to get him out of Washington, to get him into the rest of America was good for him, and it was good for the American people to see their president.
Does that include getting Joe Biden in front of, or not in front of, but to participate in interviews with the media?
There, in my experience, there are different ways to get him out there. We thought that having him go out there, give speeches, do events, actually get to talk to people was also very effective.
But did you believe that the president should also participate in media interviews?
As was appropriate.
What, can you expand on what you mean by as was appropriate?
As a mix of different ways to communicate, as our media landscape increasingly fractures, you have to work harder to get to more people across more platforms.
Did you ever advise against certain media interviews?
Did I ever? So I'd say any president, I'm sure our present one included, gets probably a couple of hundred requests a week for media interviews. So I would say that I almost certainly in the course of the White House did advise against accepting everyone.
Did you advise against the president participating in an interview that would air before the Super Bowl?
I'm sorry, when are we talking about?
Let's start with ever, and then we can narrow it down.
With ever? Okay,
Well, there were 4 years there's 4 Super Bowls. I'm the worst to talk about sports on this committee, but my understanding is it happens once a year. So any of the 4 that occurred during the Biden administration.
I think it's inevitable that she advised against lots of interviews, considering she said there were hundreds a week, and she advised against many of them, so.
No, that is true, but I'm asking if you ever advised against the president participating in the interview that would air prior to the Super Bowl.
To any Super Bowl, ever?
Any Super Bowl ever in the 4 years that President Biden was.
Are you thinking about a specific request, about a specific
Yeah.
Do you recall any particular Super Bowl interview that you advised on? There were 4, so.
Well, you're saying that you think that there were 4 times when some specific media entity requested the president to do some
Ms.
kind
Dunn,
of a.
please answer the question.
What's the question?
Did you ever
Okay.
advise against the president participating in an interview that would air prior to the Super Bowl? Immediately prior to the Super Bowl.
Well, let's get our facts straight here, okay? They don't air the interview immediately prior. They do it as part of the afternoon programming. Many networks don't air the entire interview in its entirety. They pick out maybe 2 to 3, 4 minutes. So there's this myth that grows that somehow a president's given 2 hours to address the American public at halftime, which is simply not true. Given that, I think that in 2024, the White House made the decision that the president was not going to do the CBS Super Bowl interview. And I think that's what you're asking about.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, you could have asked me.
And why did you advise against, in 2024, let's start with that interview?
the first, as I remember, I'm gonna have to remember this. It was going to be 3 minutes that they were going to show, and then an additional 20 minutes across their other platforms throughout the following week. So it really wasn't the huge interview that, say, Barack Obama had gotten when I was in the White House back then. But the second reason was a timing issue, as I remember, that we anticipated that her report was going to come out, and that we didn't feel, feel that spending, an entire interview before the Super Bowl talking about classified documents was going to help the cause too much.
When you say 3 minutes, do you mean that I'm really showing how little I know about this, and
Okay.
please educate me. When you say 3 minutes, the interview itself wouldn't last 3 minutes, right? You're talking
No,
about.
the interview was going to be longer. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No,
But-
so were you concerned that the 3 minute clip was going to be not a good clip?
Well, we were concerned it was going to be a clip that for Super Bowl watchers was not going to be what we wanted to be talking about.
And by not wanting to be talked about, you're talking about her report potentially?
I'm talking, yes, about classified documents as opposed to, whatever else the president might have wanted to talk about. So that was the decision that nobody within the White House disagreed with.
And, thank you, and it's my understanding,
Or at least nobody I know of, I'm sorry, as I remember, so.
and it's my understanding that in 2023, the president also did not do that same interview, is that correct?
In 2023, as I remember, and I wasn't directly involved with these negotiations, the White House, our press office advised that the president do the pre-Super Bowl interview with Fox Sports because Fox was airing the Super Bowl, and that we thought it would be a good way to cross over into an additional audience, the Fox Sports audience, and that at the end of the day, Fox decided not to do that.
Fox decided not to do the interview.
Correct, because they didn't want Fox Sports to do it, they wanted Fox News.
And did you advise against the president speaking with Fox News then?
I don't recall having any discussion that was, I think we had the plan on the Fox Sports, and when that didn't happen, we just moved on.
Wouldn't that be a pretty good opportunity, though, to speak with some people who maybe the president didn't, that the president could speak to a different demographic of people by having him speak with Fox News?
No,
I think she
I think
just
there were a
said
lot
that-
of interviews that we did, and there were a lot of interviews we didn't.
And on that one, why didn't you though?
No, again, I don't really remember the discussions around that.
Okay.
On the 2024 Super Bowl, you characterized the concern about the clip to be about the special counsel's report to be about classified documents. By the point at which the decision was made to not do the interview, had you already seen a copy of the report, or did you know what the report contained?
No, we did not.
So were you aware that Special Counsel Herr would make reference to President Biden being an elderly man with a poor memory?
Nope.
So just so I understand, looking back over the 4 years, you think you played it pretty consistently that Joe Biden should be out visible to the American people, and you didn't take any steps to hide him away from cameras?
As I remember it, we consistently felt that having the president out with people, which is where he really gets a lot of his strength from, was far preferable to having him in Washington, and that we drove towards a lot of that, and that we, felt that the American people hearing directly from Joe Biden was a positive.
Were there, during your time at the White House, were there concerns ever raised by the staff or by President Biden that the schedule was too heavy or that it was taking a toll on him?
As I remember, periodically, people would raise concerns around overscheduling him. This is consistent across every White House that I have been familiar with.
And so when you say consistent, these concerns were not more serious for President Biden than you were familiar with in previous administrations?
Not as I remember.
Were there ever any attempts to lighten President Biden's load with regards to his schedule?
Not that I was aware of.
Did you ever advocate for President Biden's load to be lightened
In what way?
for his schedule?
Not that I recall. I certainly advocated for trying to have press events, earlier in the day so we could try to pick up local news coverage as well as other coverage as well. I think most press secretaries you talk to would agree with that.
Are you aware of any White House staff discussing the need for President Biden to be medicated in order to deliver the State of the Union in 2024?
No.
Do you have any knowledge of President Biden's political advisors weighing in on whether Dr. O'Connor should conduct a cognitive exam of the president?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by weighing in.
Do you have any knowledge about President Biden's political advisors expressing opinions or offering advice on whether a cognitive exam should be conducted of the president?
As I remember, we had a discussion at the senior advisor level about whether the president should have a cognitive exam that was based purely in the political world on whether we thought it would help address some of the attacks that he was getting.
What attacks are you referring to?
Primarily attacks from Republican office holders. That's what I'm referring to.
Attacks about the president's
Attacks on the
cognition?
president, yes.
Who participated in those conversations?
No, I don't remember, but generally the senior advisors.
And what opinions were expressed?
I think that, as I recall, the senior advisors decided that no matter how many tests he took, it would never really quiet the people who were attacking him in an election year on these issues. We did not have any concern about his ability to pass those tests.
The senior advisors didn't think a cognitive exam would help in any way?
We did not think it would help politically, but again, we had no concerns about his ability to pass that test.
When you say senior advisors, did Dr. Biden ever participate in any of those conversations?
I am not aware that she did. If she did, it was not in a conversation I was in.
Did any member of the Biden family ever participate in those conversations?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Did you ever see President Biden receive an IV infusion?
No.
Were you ever involved in any conversations about President Biden possibly needing a wheelchair?
No.
Neurologist Dr. Kevin Kennard visited the executive mansion 8 times in 8 months between 2023 and 2024. Are you aware of those visits?
No.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm gonna ask this question for a list of people.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to ask something else first, Jake?
Real quick question. Did you recommend Andrew Bates to work in the White House?
Let's see, yes,
How did you know Mr. Bates?
I knew him from the campaign,
And did you recommend Ian Sams to work in the White House?
I did.
And how did you know Mr. Sams?
Through his work at HHS in 2021.
Thanks.
He had worked for Harris in the primaries of 2019 and had been quite effective.
What in particular made him effective?
He was an effective spokesperson and good on television.
So I'll ask you about a list of people. The question is just, when was the last time you spoke with this person? So
Okay.
when was the last time you spoke with former President Joe Biden?
Let's see, a year ago?
So a year ago, so prior to when you left the White House or afterwards?
Prior to when I left.
Do you recall the content of that conversation?
Just to tell him I was leaving.
What was his reaction to you leaving?
He had discussed it, so I was just telling him he was gonna read about it in the papers.
Former First Lady Jill Biden?
Certainly before I left the White House, I've not spoken with her since then, and I don't remember.
Hunter Biden?
Before I left the White House.
And do you recall the content of that
I do
conversation?
not, no.
Former Vice President Kamala Harris?
Before I left the White House.
So while you were at the PAC supporting,
At the
Harris.
Super PAC, I did not speak with her, no.
okay. And do you recall what that conversation was?
I don't.
Second gentleman, Doug Emhoff?
Okay. Before I left the White House.
And do you recall the
No,
conversation?
I don't.
Ron Klain?
Let's see. I spoke with Ron last year. I'm not sure, earlier this year, to get the address of his daughter who had a baby.
So that the content of your conversation was a
Nothing
personal
to do
matter?
with this investigation. No.
Jeff Zients?
Probably 6 or 7 months ago, nothing to do with this investigation.
These are all to the best of your recollection.
Yes, all to the best of my recollection.
Difficult memory test, okay.
Yes.
Mike Donnellan?
To the best of my recollection, I last spoke with him in the spring about an intern he wanted to place from Harvard, from his IOP class.
To the PAC?
No, he wanted ideas.
Okay.
Why don't we just keep it to not related to the investigation?
Okay, not really, I'm sorry.
You'll get us through
Too much
faster.
information, okay.
Bruce Reed?
Not since I left the White House,
And,
to the best of my recollection.
and do you recall
I don't.
what the conversation was about?
No, I don't.
Jen O'Malley Dillon?
Shortly after the campaign ended,
President Biden's campaign?
no, shortly after, so in November of 2024.
And do you recall the content of that conversation?
So, too bad.
So
Not related to this investigation.
Anthony Bernal?
Not since I left the White House, to the best of my recollection.
And same question, do you
No.
recall what the
No, I don't.
conversation was about?
Nothing related to this.
Annie Tomasini?
Not since I left, to the best of my recollection, and nothing related to this.
Okay. Have you discussed this interview today with anyone other than your counsel?
I mean, obviously, yes. I don't understand the question.
Yeah.
Do you mean other people who are being interviewed by the committee?
Anyone other than your counsel?
You mean the fact that I'm coming in here, or substance?
Have you discussed
I mean, my granddaughters know I'm coming in here.
I mean, we put out a press release earlier today, so I'm not sure what the
Yeah.
Have you discussed,
context is.
have you discussed the issues relevant? I'll start again. Have you discussed your testimony in today's interview with anyone other than your counsel?
I don't believe so, except,
You probably have, so
yeah,
why don't we
probably
just say
have.
yes?
Yes, okay.
And who is that?
Okay, so why don't we go off the record?
Can we go off the record for a
Can
second?
we go off record for a
Yeah.
second? Have you discussed your testimony in this interview today with anyone other than your counsel or your family?
Nothing substantive.
Ms. Dunn, did you ever believe that Karine Jean-Pierre should leave the White House?
I don't remember. Karine was a valued member of the staff.
Did you ever advocate for her firing?
I do not believe I ever advocated to fire Karine.
Did you ever work to find a graceful exit for Ms. Pierre?
I'm
I feel
not
like
sure
this is
what this
really-
has to do with anything.
I think, I'm not sure what topic we're even on at this point, but it certainly doesn't have anything to do with the president's cognitive health. Now we're doing personnel decisions at the White House.
Which are relevant to the president's doing his job.
You think that there's, I don't understand. Please explain the nexus.
Sure, the president running the White House is part of the president's job, and I'm trying to understand this personnel decision, whether it was clear, whether the president actually was the person who decided, or there were other people who contributed to her departure.
I don't understand.
I'm sorry, can
You
you answer?
think
Can you
only the president makes decisions about people leaving? I don't understand. How about,
But Karine didn't depart the White House until the end.
Sure, but did you ever advocate for her to do that?
Are you
again,
asking, did she advocate related to the subject matter of your investigation?
I'm asking if she ever advocated for Ms. Jean-Pierre to leave the White House.
And I think all we're asking you
Okay.
to do is articulate a connection between that question.
Well, if the
And the
answer
subject
is,
matter.
the answer is yes, I'll have follow-up questions. If the answer is no, then I won't.
hold on, this is
Yeah.
so far outside of the field of the topic, I have no idea what we're talking about. Do you wanna talk in the room? I don't know what we're talking about. Literally don't.
I'm not sure what we're talking about
Yeah.
either, but can we go over
Yeah.
here for
Do
just
those
1
2
second?
minutes. Sure.
Yeah.
We can go off the record.
Yeah,
Ms. Dunn, I'll ask the question again.
yes.
Did you advocate for Ms. Jean-Pierre to leave the White House?
No, I did not advocate for Karine Jean-Pierre to leave the White House.
Okay, she had something else she just wanted to explain.
I'm sorry, I also want to clarify that on the question of discussing this investigation, I did have someone I work with proofread and fact check my opening statement.
Someone fact check, someone with knowledge of
No, but
fact check, meaning?
fact check, just going through the facts that I'd put in it, the things from Martha Kumar, that kind of thing, to make sure that we had the backup for those statements.
I'm sorry, who are we talking about?
We're talking about Jordan Finkelstein, who works with me. Okay, and he just proofread it for me, so. I did not discuss the substance of this with him. Okay.
Thank you very much. We'll go off the record.
You said in your role, the president got a lot of requests for interviews, correct?
That's correct.
And because of the president's time, he couldn't do every single interview, correct?
Yes.
Did you ever prevent President Biden from doing an interview because you were concerned about his mental acuity?
No,
And the reason why you turned down interviews were because?
because we had so many demands on his schedule. I had to fight for as much time as I could get.
So throughout the day, we talk about a lot of things. We talked about whether you could recall whether President Biden made annotations on his debate prep materials. We talked about where your husband might have been any given weekend in July. Turns out he was in New York. We've talked about whether the White House made President Biden available or was willing to make him available to Fox Sports for an interview around the Super Bowl. We've talked about a range of polling. We've talked about whether people from the outside world contacted you with concerns after the president's debate with President Trump. We've talked about your various jobs throughout the 1980s. Is there anything we've talked about today that changes the views and opinions you have expressed in your opening statement?
Nothing.
So just to be clear, none of these things we've talked about today changes your testimony that the president was, he made all of the important decisions expected of someone serving as president of the United States.
That's my testimony.
That's right. He relied on senior advisors to execute his priorities and manage the day-to-day operations that allow the White House to run effectively. But your testimony is still his authority and involvement in decision-making was clear.
That's correct. Yes.
In your experience.
In your experience. Nothing we've talked about changes your experience that President Biden's ability to probe, to find the weakness in an argument, to make well-informed decisions did not change during your time in the White House, correct?
That was certainly my experience.
You know, I do think your counsel in the last hour may have inquired whether we were still on topic, given the topic maybe being what was sent to you in the letter from Chairman Comer on June 4th, potentially on this June 24th letter from the White House counsel's office, which I would just note refers to both the interview and the deposition, so there may be an error there. I think we should just quickly just go back to the topics in those letters to you. The letter to you does mention possibly usurping the authority of the former president, talks about exercising the powers of the executive branch. I'm paraphrasing very slightly here. These are terms that are not defined in the letter to you, either letter to you. So it just may be useful to quickly go through some of the president's enumerated powers in Article 2 of the Constitution, which I'm happy to share with you. I think you could also count on your lawyers to object if for some reason I am misparaphrasing something or not. We do have copies. But
Oh, I'm sorry. You
You'd
think
like it?
I haven't memorized Article 2 of the Constitution? I have not. I'll be fair to both sides.
here you go.
Read along.
And just in case you would like the 25th Amendment, please to Susanna.
Thank you.
All right. So
I'm not as good of a lawyer as you thought I was.
So we will go through some of the enumerated powers in Article 2 of the Constitution. Given that the letters you received from the White House and Chairman Comer mention executive power, potentially unconstitutional assertion of executive power by White House advisors, did you personally act as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces?
No.
Did you personally grant reprieves and pardons?
No.
Did you personally make any international treaties?
No.
Did you personally nominate and appoint any ambassadors,
No.
cabinet secretaries,
No.
judges,
No.
or other Senate-confirmed officials?
No.
Did you personally convene both houses of Congress?
No.
Did you disguise yourself as President Biden and give 3 State of the Union addresses?
No.
In your view, did President Biden faithfully execute the office of President of the United States?
Yes.
And in your view, did he, to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States?
Yes.
We're off the record.